Hola a todos, muy buenos días.
Hi,
Les damos la
hi everyone.
más
Good
cordial bienvenida
morning.
al
We
webinar 3
welcome
de
you
la idea a la acción, incubación de proyectos urbanos sostenibles en las biodiversidades,
to
organizado por el Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe y el Programa de las Naciones Unidas para los Asentamientos Humanos ONU-Habitat. Es un placer estar aquí esta mañana para acompañarlos en esta jornada de aprendizaje e intercambio. Soy María Elena Espinosa y durante esta sesión tendré el placer de
During
acompañarlos
this
como moderadora
session,
general del
I will
evento.
be the general
Ahora bien,
moderator of
pues
the
luego de haber
event.
realizado los webinars
So,
sensibilización sobre
after
la normatividad de los
organizing
Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible y el acceso al financiamiento verde, así
green
como el
financing
jueves de
webinar and
innovación
the
en
webinar
biodiversidades,
Innovation in
conectando proyectos urbanos
Biodiversities,
con
connecting
desafíos
urban
globales,
projects with global
en
challenges
donde
spaces,
se pudo
where
reflexionar acerca
we
del
have
potencial
reflected
de
on the
contribución de
potential
las
contribution of
iniciativas locales
local initiatives
basadas en los
based on
activos
the
capilares de las
environmental
ciudades para el
assets of
cumplimiento de las
cities to
agendas
the
globales
fulfillment of
de
global
desarrollo
environmental
sostenible
development
y medio
agendas
ambiente, la
for
importancia de la gobernanza
the
urbana y el
environment, the
rol de los
importance of
funcionarios
urban
locales
governance, and the
como
role of
agentes de
local
cambio
officials
y
as
líderes del
agents of
proceso para
change and
transformar
leaders of the
sus
process to
ciudades desde la
transform
naturaleza,
their cities
y
from
también de haber analizado iniciativas y formas de implementación de estrategias innovadoras urbanas para abordar los desafíos globales vinculados a la triple crisis planetaria, así como para promover el desarrollo urbano sostenible. Viene ahora este webinar denominado de la idea a la acción e incubación de proyectos urbanos sostenibles en las biodiversidades, que se centrará en proporcionar a los participantes herramientas y estrategias clave para la planificación, diseño, incubación e implementación de proyectos urbanos sostenibles que potencien la biodiversidad a partir de la generación de soluciones innovadoras, políticas públicas y prácticas inclusivas que fomenten la resiliencia ecológica y la mejora de la calidad de vida en las biodiversidades. Para ello, comenzaremos el webinar con un diálogo de alto nivel que profundizará sobre aspectos conceptuales y elementos fundamentales a considerar para la planificación, el diseño y la implementación de proyectos urbanos sostenibles en las biodiversidades, en donde también se enfatizará en la importancia de la alineación de proyectos a los principios de la red y las agendas globales, y en la definición de mecanismos de gobernanza urbana y la generación de alianzas estratégicas para la gestión, implementación y sostenibilidad de las intervenciones en las biodiversidades en el corto, mediano y en el largo plazo. Posteriormente, habrá un simposio de expertos que nos compartirán sobre herramientas para la planificación urbana y el diseño participativo de proyectos urbanos sostenibles. En estas propuestas metodológicas abordaremos sobre el diseño participativo de proyectos urbanos y se dialogará en torno a contenidos claves sobre el proceso de planificación y diseño urbano participativo, la importancia de la innovación y la integración de la biodiversidad en el diseño de proyectos, el uso de tecnologías como plataformas digitales para facilitar la colaboración comunitaria y también en mejores prácticas en el diseño de espacios urbanos resilientes y sostenibles. Cerraremos este webinar con una mesa de diálogo de la idea a la acción, incubación de proyectos urbanos, en donde justamente también compartiremos experiencias locales sobre cómo las incubadoras de proyectos pueden ser clave para apoyar a emprendedores, urbanistas y comunidades en las primeras etapas de desarrollo, proporcionando recursos, mentoría y conexiones estratégicas. Antes de continuar, les recuerdo que esta sesión está siendo grabada y será transmitida en vivo por nuestro canal de YouTube, en donde se transmite en su idioma original, pero posteriormente será publicada en redes en otros idiomas. Asimismo, les comparto que durante toda la sesión, estaremos compartiendo un QR en pantalla en donde podrán dejar sus preguntas o comentarios, mismos que en la medida de lo posible serán realizados a nuestros panelistas durante diversos momentos de la sesión. Ahora sí, iniciando ya con la agenda del evento, damos la bienvenida a Alejo Ramírez. Él es el coordinador de la red de biodiversidades de CAF, quien nos estará compartiendo unas palabras de apertura de este webinar. Alejo, por favor, adelante y bienvenido.
Muchas gracias, María Elena, por tus palabras de apertura y por la moderación de la actividad. Para CAF es una inmensa alegría volver a estar juntos con nuestros socios de ONU-Habitat y del Instituto Humboldt, movilizando esta red que ya tiene casi 200 ciudades adheridas y que busca efectivamente no solamente dar una discusión y un debate sobre el desarrollo urbano y los sistemas ecosistémicos, sino también pensar en cómo pasar de la idea a la acción, cómo efectivamente poder apoyar, financiar, estructurar y consolidar buenos proyectos para proteger a las ciudades y particularmente a los sistemas ambientales de nuestra región. Quería inicialmente saludar con mucho afecto a Elkin Velázquez, que seguramente en breve se conectará, y a todo el equipo de ONU-Habitat, grandes socios en esta iniciativa, también por supuesto a Diana y a todo el equipo del Instituto Humboldt, que han sido dos grandes puntales para la estructuración de esta red, que en ese sentido, tanto desde nuestro presidente Sergio Díaz Granados como nuestro vicepresidente Cristian Asinelli y el gerente de Desarrollo Urbano Ángel Cárdenas, que ahora están todos en El Salvador, en nuestro directorio de fin de año, estructurando y aprobando proyectos para nuestra región. Nos resulta la red de biodiversidad absolutamente estratégica para la CAF, creada en el 2021 con la idea de generar un diálogo, un hermanamiento entre el desarrollo urbano y la diversidad de nuestra región, que es inmensa, es la región con más diversidad del mundo, pero al mismo tiempo la región más urbanizada y por lo tanto la destrucción de biodiversidad es muy grande y muy acelerada. Y lo que busca esta red es ser un poco el puntal en el deseo de CAF de convertirse en el Banco Verde de América Latina, pero también en el Banco de los Subnacionales, en el Banco de las Ciudades. Y creo que hasta ahora hemos venido trabajando mucho en el diálogo, en la discusión, en los debates, nos hemos visto en la COP, hemos hecho muchos webinares, muchos encuentros regionales, y obviamente utilizándolos también para materializar proyectos y poder materializar efectivamente buenos proyectos y buenas prácticas en las ciudades. Pero este salto que da la red ahora de la idea a la acción, a
Now that we're
partir de
moving to
la
this
aceleración,
idea
de la
to action,
innovación y de la
expanding,
mentoría a
incubation,
proyectos
mentoring,
en ciudades
to
concretos
projects in
desde la
cities, to
red,
specific
me
projects
parece un
from the
salto
network,
mayúsculo y un salto
is
que
a huge
queremos
leap, a leap
celebrar.
that we
Y para
want to
eso hemos
celebrate.
convocado
And
socios, amigos,
we have
expertos,
invited
consultores de
friends,
CAF
partners,
y otras personas
consultants of CAF,
con
and
diferentes
different
perspectivas
people with
para que nos ayuden a
different
pensar cómo
perspectives to help
efectivamente
us
las
think in
ciudades
how
pueden
cities can
generar y
actually
acercar a CAF
generate and
buenos
bring CAF
proyectos y buenas
closer
ideas
to good
para ir
projects and good ideas,
mejorándolas,
for
para ir
improving them,
acercándolas mucho
for
más a un
bringing
proceso
them
de
closer
financiamiento.
to a financing process.
Y en ese sentido creo que este
And
diálogo que se abre ahora es un
what we're
diálogo mucho
saying
más
now,
concreto,
well,
mucho
this is
más
a more specific dialogue.
intenso, y por lo tanto quiero agradecer a todos los
And I'd
expositores
like
que
to
van a
thank
estar y
all
expositoras que van a estar
presenters
acompañándonos en
that
las
will
próximas 2
be
horas.
in these
Y
2
creo que
hours.
efectivamente es importante tener en
And
cuenta que
it's
vamos
absolutely
a
important
culminar este proceso,
to
ojalá a
combine
finales del
this
año, principio del
process
año que
at
viene,
the end of the
haciendo una
year or the
convocatoria
beginning of the
concreta
year, having a
para
specific
identificar aquellos
invitation for
proyectos de la región que desde CAF
identifying
y con
projects
nuestros
in the
socios de
nation
ONU-Habitat,
and in the region
Instituto
that from
Humboldt
our
y también con
partners,
los
CAP,
expertos y consultores
UN-Habitat,
que CAF
Humboldt
tiene,
Institute,
vamos a
and all
acelerar,
consultants from
vamos a
CAP. We
hacer
will
mentorías, vamos a
accelerate. We will
incubar
have also
para llevarlos a la
mentorships.
práctica, para
We will incubate
materializarlos,
these
para que
projects so
efectivamente
that they
podamos
become a
tener,
reality, so that we
más allá de
can
los proyectos que ya las
actually have
ciudades tienen, que son muchos y muy buenos,
lots
¿quién
of
mejor que
projects
nuestros socios para
already.
decirlo?
Our
Pero
partners are
también
very good at
lo que
those
podamos
projects, but also
financiar y lo podamos
for projects
apoyar
that we
desde
can
CAF.
finance and support them
Por lo
from
tanto, este
CAF.
no es un webinar
So
más,
this is not just one more
y estamos
webinar.
muy contentos de que
And
así
we're
sea
very
y que se
glad
inicie a
to
partir
be
de finales
here
del
and to start here.
24, 25 y 26 con una
And so that year
materialización mucho más de lo
2024,
que hacemos
25, and
a través de la
26,
red de
things become
biodiversidades.
more
Además,
reality through this
contarles como
biodiversity
titular, en breve
network.
lo
And
vamos a
also,
comunicar oficialmente, que
we
vamos a
will
tener
officially
disponibles
share
los
with you, we
recursos del
will have
25 y
some
el 26
resources
para
available for
adaptación
25 and
climática, que van a ser
26 for
muy
climate
relevantes,
adaptation, very
destinados
relevant
específicamente
resources
a las ciudades de América Latina y
for
el Caribe, en nuestro
Latin
caso,
American
bastante
cities,
importantes.
very important
Así que nada,
resources.
sigan
And
conectados
well,
a la
that's
red,
it.
sigan
Keep
conectados a
connected.
nuestros canales de comunicación, a las redes sociales, que por allí vamos a tener
Follow us on social
informaciones
media.
tan
We will have
importantes como las que van a
information
conocer
that's as
en estas
important as the
próximas
one
2
that
horas.
you'll
Así que
get
agradezco
to
mucho
know in the coming
nuevamente
2
a
hours.
los
So thanks
socios,
again very much
mucho
to our
nuevamente
partners.
a
Thanks so much
los
again
expositores y
to
expositoras que van a
all
estar. Así
presenters
que
of
damos
today.
formalmente apertura y en cuanto él quien pueda conectarse,
And as soon as
obviamente
Elkin
abriremos el
connects,
momento para
we
poder
will
escuchar las
open
interesantísimas
the
palabras
floor
que
so that
siempre
we get to listen to
él
his
y ONU Habitat tiene para compartirnos. Muchas gracias, María
experiences
Elena.
that he has to share with
Muchas
all of us.
gracias,
Thanks so
Andrés,
much,
y
Maria
Alejo,
Elena.
por
Thanks so much,
participar
Alejo, for
en
your
este
opening
webinar.
message in this webinar.
Para ONU Habitat, pues es
For you in
también
Habitat,
bastante gratificante poder
it's
estar
also very
participando
gratifying to
y
be
compartiendo con
sharing
ustedes
with all of
todo el
you
trabajo que se está
all the
haciendo
work
alrededor
that
de
you're
la
doing
biodiversidad.
around the BiodiverCities Network.
Entonces, para continuar con el orden del día, vamos a dar
Now,
paso a nuestra primera parte de esta
our
sesión.
first part of the
Para
session,
ello, vamos a tener la participación de
we
dos
will
investigadores con
have the
amplia
participation
experiencia y
of two
reconocimiento
very
internacional
well acknowledged
que reflexionarán
researchers
sobre
that
la
will
importancia de
reflect
hacer
around the
ciudades más
experience
accesibles para la
in more accessible projects for biodiversity and the role that each element plays on biodiversity in cities. For this, we would like now to welcome, and we thank Fernando Murillo very much for joining us. Thanks so much, Fernando, for your participation in this space and for your moderation as well. Fernando, I'll just read your resume real quick. He's an expert in urban planning, in architecture and housing, with experience for low-income societies. He has worked at different agencies and cooperation organisms, leading initiatives in Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. He has developed participatory tools for improvement neighborhoods and for preventing underdevelopment. He's currently working with UN-Habitat, and he's also a professor at the Buenos Aires University, where he coordinates urban planning projects. His approach combines sustainability, resilience, for climate challenges. Again, Fernando, welcome. Thanks so much. The floor is yours.
Muchas gracias, María Elena.
Thanks so much, Maria Elena. It's great to be here with all of you today.
Como bien expresaba quienes me antecedieron, creo que estamos en esta red.
We are in this
en un momento
network
clave,
in a key
para
moment
la incubación de proyectos en
for
América Latina. Me
incubating
gusta
projects
mucho
in Latin America.
este
I
concepto de
like this concept of
biodiversidades,
biodiversity. It's a very necessary term and relevant in the context that we're currently seeing all over the world. So it's a great honor to have two experts, international experts, with us that will speak more about not just their research and work, but also their vision. So this session is prepared for asking a specific question that I'll be reading to you in a minute. It's a question that I have for each of you. And you will answer with a brief presentation, and after their answers, we will open a space for dialogue amongst the speakers and our audience to learn more about their experiences. And this will be done through very specific questions. I'll bring some questions, some specific questions, but please, if you have any questions, you can start thinking or sharing in the chat your thoughts and comments. So, well, I'd like to introduce you to all of both of them. They're very well known. And I'd like to start introducing you to Carlos Moreno. He's a director of the ETI, Entrepreneurial Territory and Innovation, and he's an associate professor in Paris at the Panthéon-Sorbonne University. He's well known for his innovative project of the city of 15 minutes, that we are very well aware of that concept. Moreno is trying to promote resilience and the reduction of.
Su visión ha sido abordada por líderes internacionales, incluyendo la alcaldesa de París, Anne Hidalgo, contribuyendo a transformaciones urbanas significativas. Es autor de la Revolución de la Proximidad,
of the Revolution of Proximity and 15-minute cities, a solution to saving our time on our planet. He has received awards such as Over Hour in 2021 and also the Global Leadership Award in 2024. He's a member of Sigma, CM, and the American Academy of Housing. He's co-founder as well of the Global Observatory of Proximity, and as a scientist of organizations, his work reflects global impact, and he fosters cities that are affordable and living, cities that prioritize well-being. So having shared this presentation, I'll start reading the questions that I have for Carlos Moreno. The 15-minute cities has become an urbanistic proposal, a key proposal.
Sin embargo, ¿cuáles son las estrategias claves para integrar eficazmente la biodiversidad en el modelo de 15 minutos?
For the 15-minute cities project. So I'll pass the floor to Carlos Moreno so that he can answer the question through his presentation. Thanks so much.
Doctor Carlos Moreno.
Dr. Carlos Moreno, the floor is yours.
Sí, estaba en mute, entonces
Apologies, my microphone
me
was
toca
off.
buscar de nuevo la presentación.
Let me
A ver
just
si
try
lo
to find my
encuentro por
presentation
acá.
again. Let me see
No
if I
sé
find
si
it over here.
aparece en la
I don't know if you
pantalla.
can see it now on the screen.
Aparece.
Yeah, we can see it
Aparece.
now. Yeah, we can see
Sí,
it now.
perdón por el mute.
Apologies
Muchas
for
gracias,
this.
Fernando,
Thanks so much,
y de
Fernando.
nuevo, un saludo a todas y
And
todos.
again,
Hoy
greetings
desde
to
Roma.
everyone. I'm in Rome
Me excuso
now.
de tener luego que salir a otro
Apologies
evento,
that I might
justamente que estoy
have to
invitado
leave
aquí. Acabo de
to an event.
de
They invited me
llegar
to an event
y
and I
es un gran
just arrived
placer
here. So,
estar
but it's a great pleasure to be
compartiendo,
here
además, con estos
sharing
dos aliados
with these
estratégicos
two
que
strategic
son
partners that are
UN-Habitat y CAF.
UN-Habitat and
Sin
ICAF.
tardar, entro directamente a responder
And
a la
I'll
pregunta de
answer right
Fernando
away
y
Fernando's question.
además me apoyaré en unas
And
imágenes
I'll be
que he
sharing some
preparado.
images as well that I prepared for this
Efectivamente,
presentation.
hemos
So yes,
hablado de la
we have
de los 15 minutos,
spoken
estamos hablando
about the
de
15-minute
biodiversidad.
city. We're speaking about
Digo
that
que
biodiversity.
en estos
And
momentos es clave,
now
en particular en
it's
América
key
Latina, cambiar
in
de
Latin
paradigma
America to shift
en
the
esta
paradigm.
convergencia vida urbana,
Now
proximidad
in this
y
proximity, urban life,
biodiversidad.
and biodiversity
Lo digo
movement.
siempre,
And I always say
y
this,
es muy válido en América Latina.
and
Hay
it's a very
muchas
valid
formas
comment in
de
Latin America.
ciudades
There are
en el
many
mundo.
different ways of cities
América
in the
Latina,
world.
segundo,
Latin
es un continente más
America
urbanizado del
is
mundo,
one of those,
84.6,
it's one of the most populated continents in the world, 84.6 in the north of America. So the question that we ask ourselves all the time in the urban ecosystem is, what is the city that we want to live in? Because
y más allá, yo
beyond,
profundizo la pregunta
I want to elaborate on this question, saying we all want to live better. And what's well-being? What's urban well-being? How can we reshape it? 15-minute cities have gone all over the world, and I always share this. Beyond the number of minutes, 15 minutes and moving, the 10-minute city in the Netherlands, the 20-minute territory in Scotland, all over the world. There are many different ways of introducing this 15-minute city concept. And I'm speaking about well-being and biodiversity. I'd like to answer to the question,
que es fundamental en la comprensión de lo que es las ciudades 15 minutos, la proximidad y el bienestar. Todo eso fue la respuesta que dio la antropóloga norteamericana Margaret Mead en un programa
radiofónico, anthropologist in a radio show, when they asked her about the first symbol of human existence. And Margaret Mead showed this bone, that's a broken leg, when men were just starting to populate the world, and he was saying, this bone is well dead. That is, the person that got this leg broken kept it so that beasts would not eat it, and taking care of it, being next to that person, allowed this person to have his bone fixed. And that's when society started care. And we're speaking about that care. What is a city of X number of minutes, a territory of X number of minutes? These are places where proximity is expressed not just in distances, but also in care, in equality, in less pollution, in more health for everyone, in more security for everyone, more citizens. It has all kinds of services, schools, cultural centers, workshops, police stations, nurseries, parks. And that's when we speak about the importance of biodiversity. What is that? It's going beyond care, that it's not just apples, but it's also a policy of well-being. As soon as our well-being is threatened in our cities because of climate change, because of polluted cities, because of the air that's polluted, because of the lack of water, because of hydric stress, because of our problems for moving. In Latin America, climate emergency is combined with the loss of biodiversity, connected directly to the massive urbanization to the one we're subject to. Climate change is a reality in Latin America. We're speaking nowadays of more than 300 million people that are being impacted directly by
Nuestro
climate change.
bienestar está
Our
amenazado,
well-being
y en
is
ese continente
threatened,
tan urbanizado es fundamental
and it's
medir las consecuencias
key to measure the consequences, the economic consequences of climate impact. For instance, what happened in Acapulco, that it was destroyed twice. This is just an example of what's happening. Not long ago, we had COP16 in Colombia, and Cartagena was also flooded. This photo was taken one day before the COP. So this is how cities are created since the letter of Athens in 1933. These mineral cities, cities with cars, cities with infrastructure, with places that are far away from everyone to live. We've lost the contact with nature. We've lost the contact with biodiversity. And beyond that, we're fully destroying it. And for this reason, the proximity that we propose has opened a dialogue on the new urban practices, and that is the main success of it. Its success is that we're scientists, that we're heard by our leaders, by mayors, by my friend, the mayor from Paris, took this concept before COVID in 2019. And what you see now on the screen is something that we're doing already in Paris. We shifted the city to a biodiversity, to a city with urban forest, a city of proximity, a city of services, because this is the encounter of urban managers or people such as the mayor and scientists that are working on the consciousness of building this kind of city. So we don't just want to bridge the gap economic differences, but also bridge the gap of space injustice. Everything is farther with urban segregation and in a mineral environment, and also temporary segregation when 2, 3, or 4 hours are necessary just for going to work and wasting your full life in commuting. Vulnerability, social vulnerability and insecurity is what happens every day in Latin America. So we are reinventing with science, with my friend Mohamed Yudo, zero carbon, zero poverty. It's a 000 world. And with my colleague, Professor Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize, we're reinventing proximity as a new geographical economy, a new geography of a long-lasting durability that plays a key role, where nature is key, where biodiversity is key. So we wrote a text just recently, a scientific article with Paul Krugman, and we signed it, on how we can use the knowledge of cities for all this long time and to update it and what proximity means and what biodiversity means and what nature means. So we're speaking of proximity as resilience. We're speaking of proxilence. I spoke about this in Cairo when I had the opportunity of opening this dialogue of cities and climate change. Proxilence is the proximity as a resilience that's economic and social. Our mode of life is in the heart of the solution. And then if we're speaking climate COPs, biodiversity COPs, COP16 in Cali was peace with nature in October. And the agreement that was signed, One Health, means that people, societies, they're mixed with everything that's life, animal, plants, with non-living beings, and with the environment as well. And in the final declaration of the Urban Forum in Cairo, the fifth point was placing proximity and circularity at the center of urban development is necessary for everyone. Everything starts home. Everything starts locally, actions for long-lasting development of cities and communities. So we're speaking here of life quality as public policy. We're promoting social circularity with urbanism aimed at human beings. We're speaking about services for high quality of life. We're speaking about a route that changes the shape of cities. And within 7 decades after the Athens letter, that segmentation, gentrification, and segregation. So we're speaking about offering services as close as possible, both housing, supply, care, health, culture, learning,
descanso.
And for rest as well, and to shift the way in which we work. We're speaking of adapting these services to the needs of each of us that are different. We're young, we're old, we have good health, we have bad health, with or without children. So we're creating these new indicators where biodiversity plays a key component, and we're implementing this in a specific context. For this reason, we have created the Global Observatory of Sustainable Proximities with UN-Habitat, with UCLG, and with our own masterclass. That's the place for all of those that work in long-lasting durability. Paris, it's an example now in services and quality of life, where proximity is at the heart of our resilience, with water, with the river, with urban forest, with also the generation of open stores and markets, with the capability also that human beings are connected to nature. Schools don't have cars in front of schools, they have urban parks now. The patios in school are open, and they're patios that have nature as an everyday element of resilience. We're building new neighborhoods where at the core biodiversity is located in its natural space, and it means that we are connected to it. And we are also connecting these to citizens so that they are part of this process. We just voted for the very first time in the world in a city. We just voted the bioclimatic plan. That's the new urban plan. And its first point is nature as a common well, and we have hyperflexibility. In Santiago de Chile, and I'd like to thank CAF for their support for the project that we're currently doing in this new park, where we have the master plan ready to work in Santiago, to work in this new park, to include all these elements, offering a new perception both of public space as well as the way of living and the services that we offer. And one of the key pillars of this project, financed by CAF, and we are working with the government of Chile, is to reconnect to nature, as well as other points, health, culture, and patrimony. In Milan, for instance, we're working so that this biodiversity is also part of the city. Instead of having these kind of mineral places, we're building these kind of places full of life. In the US, it's harder. In Cleveland, 200 million euros by the mayor for this specific project. In Iztapalapa, with the mayor now of Mexico, Clara Brugada, utopias that are very important elements, with Verónica Delgadillo, the new mayor of Guadalajara. I've been with her, and we've been speaking about developing this idea of well-being. Buenos Aires, with the green streets that we were able to create at the end of Horacio mandate, in Morocco, in Africa, in cities that are very affected by climate change. In Australia, in Melbourne, for instance, the other side of the world, so that this 20-minute proximity is embedded with nature and at its heart. Asia, in Busan, the second capital, the second largest city. In China, it's the same. Biodiversity is also part of this project, that the 15-minute life in circles of community. Scotland, country biodiversity, has included this concept as well in their country with a law that was voted in parliament. In my city, in Paris, in its regions, and in smaller rural cities in France, in Poland, this concept is being already implemented. So I'll close here saying that, dear colleagues and dear strategic partners, proximity is not just minutes and the number of meters. Proximity is a different way of living. It's a different economic model. It's a different way of creating global jobs, of creating neighborhoods, of getting familiar, not just with nature, but using nature. Because nature is also in charge of us. If we take care of nature, nature will take care of us. That's the difference between care and well-being. Well-being is what we call in Santiago de Chile is the entropy of cities, looking and striving for balance. And with nature, nature is not just there for decor. It's not just there for breeding. It's also to find a new balance, an ecological balance, not just an ornament. Thanks so much.
Gracias, doctor Moreno.
Thanks
La
so
verdad
much,
que
Dr.
el
Moreno.
planteo de un cambio de paradigma, ¿no? No
This
solo de
shifting
ciudad,
of
sino
paradigm, not just of the
de
city, but
estilo de vida,
also
podríamos decir, es el
lifestyle.
marco perfecto
That's
para
the
presentarlo a
perfect
Gerardo Ceballos
framework
también.
for introducing you to Gerardo Ceballos. Gerardo
es investigador mexicano en el
is a
Instituto
Mexican
de Ecología de la
researcher from the
Universidad Nacional
Ecology
Autónoma de
Institute in the
México
National
y
University
uno
of
de los
Mexico,
ecólogos más
and
destacados de
one of the
América
most
Latina.
important
Es
ecologists in
reconocido por
Latin
su
America. He's
investigación
acknowledged for his
en
pioneering
ecología y
research in
conservación y ha
ecology
transformado
and
la comprensión
conservation,
global
and he
sobre la
has transformed
biodiversidad,
the understanding of
particularmente en torno a la
biodiversity,
sexta
specifically
extinción
around
masiva y la
the sixth
aniquilación
massive
biológica.
extinction and
Su trabajo
biological
integra
annihilation. His
ciencia de
work
frontera con
includes science
postulaciones
of
prácticas
borders
para la
with practical
sostenibilidad
solutions for
ecológica
ecological
dentro de la política
sustainability
pública para el
in
desarrollo.
public policy
Es
for
autor de más de
development. He's author of
530
more than
artículos científicos y
530
55
scientific
libros.
articles and
Sus
55
estudios
books.
abordan temas
His
como
studies include
especies en
topics such
peligro,
as
la vinculación
species
entre
in
conservación y
danger, the
desarrollo.
connection between
Es autor de La aniquilación de
development,
la
and
naturaleza y
he's
de
also
Reducing
author
the Sixth
Annihilation of
Mass
Nature and
Extinction, Understanding the Value
Reducing
of Human
Massive
Altered
Extinction and
Landscape.
Understanding
Es también
the
miembro de la
Value
Academia
of
Americana de Artes y Ciencias y la
Landscape. He's
Academia
also
Nacional
part
de
of the,
Ciencias de los Estados
he's
Unidos
member of
y ha
the
sido galardonado con
Academy of
el Premio
Science, and he's been
BBVA,
awarded with the
Fronteras de
BBUVA
Conocimiento en Ecología y Conservación,
Award
y en el Premio Fundación
for
BBVA para la Conservación de la Naturaleza del
Conservancy, and also
2017.
the
Su
award in
trabajo contribuye al
2017. His
desarrollo
work
de la
has
política
contributed to the
pública dentro
development of
de
the
América
creation of
Latina.
public
Creo que
policies
es el
in Latin
complemento
America.
perfecto
So this is the
para lo
perfect match
que venía
for
planteando el doctor Moreno, así
what
que
Dr. Moreno just
doctor Gerardo
shared.
Ceballos,
So
le
Dr.
cedo
Gerardo
la palabra.
Ceballos, the floor is yours.
¿Se ve bien allí?
Is it clear now? Can you see
¿Me
my
escuchan?
presentation? Can you hear me?
Bueno,
Perfectamente.
muchísimas
se ve.
gracias.
Just fine.
Muy
Thanks so much.
interesante la presentación
Very
del doctor
interesting
Moreno.
presentation by Dr. Moreno.
En realidad, lo que yo hago es una escala planetaria, una escala de
What I
grandes
do
regiones.
is
Y lo que he
to
estado
work in big
viendo,
regions,
me
and what
interesa
I've
mucho
seen,
participar en
and I'm
este
very
panel,
interested in
es
working
porque
in this panel,
este
is because
conocimiento global y
this
regional
global and regional
aplicado a las
knowledge
ciudades que
applied
son tan
to
importantes
cities that
es
are very
fundamental para
important
tener
is
mejor
also
calidad de
key
vida.
for
Yo voy
having
a
a better
hacer
quality
una
of life.
presentación, básicamente que
I'll
voy a recorrer lo
I'll
que
share a
hacemos
presentation.
en mi
I'll
trabajo, en mi
share what we
investigación
do
y al
here
final
in my job and my
relacionarlo
research,
con
and then I'll
precisamente los
connect
beneficios
this
que tiene
to the
esto,
benefits
como
that
mencionó el
this
doctor
has,
Moreno,
just as
para
Dr.
la
Moreno explained,
sostenibilidad y
to
la mejor
sustainability
¿sí?
and for a better well-being.
Bueno, brevemente,
So real
decirles que mi
quickly,
trabajo, yo hago
my
ciencia
work,
básica en
I
ecología
work in
y
science, basic
conservación,
science on ecology
y
and
lo que
conservation,
hacemos en el
and
laboratorio,
what we do
aplicamos
in the
este
laboratories to
conocimiento,
apply this knowledge
tener mayor biodiversidad desde zonas
so that
urbanas
we
hasta
have
zonas
more biodiversity in urban
continentales, y una cuestión que
settlements and
trabajamos a nivel
continental
de
regions,
especies y de
and we
ecosistemas.
work with
Por
different
ejemplo,
species
tenemos
and
el trabajo
ecosystems.
más
We have
sostenido en jaguares en América
the
Latina.
work of
Hemos
jaguars in Latin America. We have
reintroducido el bisonte en México y cosas así
also
bastante novedosas,
introduced
por un lado,
bison
y por otro
in
lado,
Mexico, very innovative things,
hacemos
but
áreas
also
protegidas.
we
Tuvimos la
create
fortuna
natural
de poder
protected
trabajar
areas. We were
con
lucky
alguien
to work with
en el gobierno anterior,
someone in the
con
previous
Luis Miguel
government in
Bellincés,
Mexico,
3.5 millones de hectáreas nuevas de
and we were
reservas
able to
para la
have
conservación del
3.5
jaguar y
new
otras especies.
hectares
Este es un
for the
jaguar,
conservation of
trabajamos con
jaguar.
ellos,
So this is a
ponemos
jaguar. We work with
collar de
jaguar.
telemetría para ver cómo
They
se
have
mueven,
this
etcétera. Y una
necklace
cuestión
so
muy
that we know
interesante
how they
relacionada con
move and
esta
everything.
es que hay
And
zonas
something
de
connected
México
to this
en
is that
donde los jaguares
there are
literalmente
areas
están
in Mexico
viviendo
where jaguars
en los alrededores de
are
las ciudades.
living
Por
in the
ejemplo,
surroundings
en
of the
Playa
city.
del
For
Carmen
instance, in
tenemos
Playa
un
del
hotel
Carmen,
que tiene un
there's a
campo de golf y
hotel
abajo del
that
campo de
has a
golf hay
golf
una
court,
caverna y
and
ahí
there's
vive
a
un jaguar
cave, and
perfectamente
there's a
bien en
jaguar living
coexistencia
there,
con los
and they
humanos.
can
Y
coexist
finalmente
perfectly
hacemos
well,
política
humans
pública
and
en el sentido
people
de que
and
logramos que esta
jaguars.
información se
And we try
vuelva
that this
políticas a nivel del
information
país, a nivel
becomes
de
public policies in the country
Latinoamérica, etcétera,
and all over
para
Latin
que
America
con
as well,
esto
so that
se pueda tener un mayor impacto.
we can
Por
have
ejemplo, propusimos
a
la ley
bigger
de especies en
impact.
peligro de extinción en
We
México, que ahora protege
also
casi a
created
3.000
the law of
especies, y propusimos
protection of
con
species,
una ministra
and
del Medio Ambiente
we
hace
also
algunos
work with
años, hace
the
20 años, la creación de la del
Minister
Consejo
of
Nacional de Áreas
Ecology. We
Protegidas,
work with
que
the
ahora es la
National Council
entidad
of
que
Protected
maneja
Areas. That's
a
now the
todas las
entity
áreas
that's in
protegidas
charge of
federales en el
handling
país, con
all
casi
these federal
20
protected
millones de
areas with
hectáreas.
also
Y bueno,
almost 20
entrando a
million
lo que voy, le
hectares.
quisiera
And Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about this. I'll speak in general, and then I'll speak more specifically about some components. So what's biological diversity? I'm sure that all of you know. Biological diversity is the set of plants, animals, mushrooms, and wild microorganisms and their interactions in the planet. By that, I mean, in cities, plants, and well, we can have gardens, we can have forests, and this depends on how complex interactions of this biological biodiversity is. And if we have them as gardens or parks, or if they are more complex areas, the more complex the area is, the more benefit they have for biodiversity and for human beings. And part of my job is on how to keep biological biodiversity in the planet on the one hand, so that with that, we can have enough incentives of maintaining them, but also on the other hand, what are the benefits that we have of keeping this biological biodiversity? And I'll quickly speak about that. So one of the things that I want to emphasize is that we know very little about biological biodiversity. There are around 2 million species in the world. The new estimate, the most moderate ones, estimate that there are 50 to 60 million species. This is an estimate of 2017 that's using complex algorithms and mathematical models, and well, it says that there might be 1 trillion species. So if we speak about 50 million species, and well, we are, of course, knowing very little of the species around. This slide shows animals that have been discovered in recent years. We have monkeys. These are mammals. Now, just imagine what happens with insects, etc. So this has different implications. First of all, the impact that we have when building a city, we're probably extinguishing societies and many species that are not even recorded by science. So this is a pity by itself. But of course, these different species play a role in nature that's key for making nature work. And an interesting thing as well is that, well, to me, it is amazing. And well, there are lots of new species of animals, big animals, that have been described, that have been discovered in cities. For instance, just recently,
Recientemente se descubrieron
four species were discovered of these lizards without legs in the LA airport. One of them was inside the airport of LA and the other 3 around. And this dolphin that was recently discovered in the shores of Melbourne in Australia. So that is, cities already have diversity, and as Dr. Moreno spoke about this shifting of the paradigm and this redesign, this is happening real quickly, maybe structured or not that very well structured, and this is happening in the planet and all over Latin America. So this is very important to keeping these biodiversities of species, many species that we don't even know. So this big biodiversity that we have in the planet is facing a loss never seen before, and it's a loss of the population. The species has different populations of species, and I'm speaking about the population because this is key for us to understand that in local surroundings and regional surroundings, we have to keep species even if they have a wide distribution. And let me just give you an example, jaguar. Or in Mexico, if tapir or jaguar disappear in Mexico, it doesn't really matter that we have tapir or jaguars in the rest of Latin America, because we're losing the main features of these animals for maintaining the environmental balance in Mexico. In local areas, and this has big implications. So this is part of the work we've been doing with my colleagues of Stanford, where we've found that this big loss of species, we almost lost 1,000 species, and that's what we know in the last 4 centuries, because modern taxonomy started and UN, and they've been counting the loss of species, but we did not have any species between 1500 and 1700. We started writing them down in the 18th century, but in the past 4 centuries, we have lost at least, well, we know and they're classified, we have lost at least 1,000 species of vertebrate. And probably it's many more because we haven't recorded them all. We're losing probably millions of populations of species, of wild species, of animals and plants, and lots of species that are in danger of extinction. So this is our article. It's called Biological Annihilation to this problem, because when I grew up 4 or 5 decades ago, in reality, scientists could identify very clearly the species in danger of extinction because of their features. They were the largest, etc. But that's over. Now, basically, we can have one species, one microorganism. We have a new book that's called Before They Vanish. It was published now this past September by Johns Hopkins Press, and we include microbes, microorganisms, mammals, and the extinguishing of them and what are the consequences. And we call them biological annihilation because the impact of our activities is ending up with microbes and big mammals. 30 years ago, 20 years ago, if I had said that we had the possibility of finishing with microorganisms, lots of my colleagues would have laughed at me. We have been able to shift the paradigm, and well, we scientists thought that extinction that were currently happening were probably similar to the ones that happened in the last million years, but we were lucky to have a very complex database, and we were able to set that we're in the 6th massive extinction. It's called the 6th massive extinction because in the past 500 million years, we've had 5 extinctions, big extinctions, where the rate of loss of species have been higher than the rates of generations of species, evolutionarily speaking. And we're now in the 6th massive extinction. This extinction is caused by us, by human beings, and by species. Look, this is very serious. Look at the magnitude of these. Species that extinguished in 100 years should have extinguished in 10,000 years. This is just for vertebrates. In some groups of invertebrates, such as the rate of extinction is 1,000 times more. What extinguished in 100 years should have is extinguished in 1,000 years. And that's the impact of human beings. And I'll speak about the consequences of this and how cities play a very important role for keeping this biological diversity. So what are the causes for this 6th extinction? Well, Dr. Moreno spoke about some of them, but the 3 main are the size of the human population. Every year we have 100 million more humans in the planet. Every 10 years we have 1 million people more on the planet. That's unsustainable. The planet is finite. It's a space, it's finite, and biologically speaking, this is a population that's growing at the rate of human beings has 2 possibilities: a collapse or that we stabilize this. So our actions are very important for that. So on the one hand, we have the size of the human population, then our patterns of consumption. We have a higher impact when we have more means compared to people that have lower consumption rates, and also inefficient technologies that are causing this, and this is leading to a very strong problem. The loss of natural environments and fragmentation, deforestation is one of the main causes for this extinction, for the 6th massive extinction, and cities can play a guiding role for maintaining these ecosystems and these species. And number 2, this is a very important way of keeping biological biodiversity, but also facing problems as serious as the one that we discussed, climate change, global climate change. And they usually ask me, let me see if I can come back to the previous slide. Yeah, they usually ask me, why should we care? Why should we care about this? And well, there are many reasons for us to care. They're ethical, philosophical, moral, spiritual, religious reasons. If we were very selfish in our vision on why we should care about maintaining biodiversity, biological biodiversity, because, well, we should care because it includes biological systems, ecosystems, and these ecosystems are key. Look, they're key for keeping environmental services so that we can have access to all these great benefits that all human beings have and all beings that live in the planet for the good work of the systems. And that they work properly depends on the number of plants and animals and microorganisms that interact. Like, for instance, in Calakmul, that's a reserve that we have in the south of Mexico, we believe that there are 70,000 species, 70,000 species in this space. So how do they interact? And these species provided with all these elements. The most important one of the environmental services, it's a combination, the right combination of the gases of the atmosphere so that we have life on planet Earth. This is the only planet where there's life in the universe that has more galaxies and planets than sands of grain in the ocean. It's that big. And the number and the quality of running water, fertilization of soil, pollination, 70 or 75% of the crops that are being used nowadays fully depend on pollination of wild animals such as bats, bees, bugs. 70% of medications, the medications that we're currently using, come from animals, plants, and wild mushrooms. So what's happening now? The rates of destruction are so accelerated, and we've already seen what's happening with species, but also at the level of ecosystems since 1917, as of now, we have lost half of the ecosystems that remain in the planet. So that is half of the ones that exist should be key for surviving. There's an agreement in Montreal, the 2030, but it's not enough. Nowadays, we cannot afford to keep losing ecosystems, but because every time we're losing an ecosystem, we're having a vulnerability of avoiding a collapse of civilization. Our studies and the studies of many colleagues specify that if we don't start acting accelerated and seriously, we can have a collapse, a global collapse of civilization in the coming 2 or 3 decades. And people say, well, in an interview in CNN, they told me, they said that we are very that I'm alarmed, and I'm really alarmed by the speed of all this happening, and I am alarmed. And so these are the environmental services that you probably know. These are the different topics that it covers, and this is how we call them. I'll go a little faster, but these services are fundamental for keeping all systems, and such as water production, keeping the global atmosphere. There's some other more regional, and there's some others that are local, and city are also essential for us, not just to keep these environmental services and this biodiversity at the local level, but also they can be the engine with this shift of vision, with this understanding that we are now in a massive extinction that has this very severe impact in environmental systems that put at risk human survival. And cities and this vision can also become a catalyzer of the changes that are required for the country and throughout the planet. So I'm hopeful that we're going in the right direction. I also believe that now there are no international entities that are doing the effort that's required. We scientists, we made a mistake. We're saying that's an expense of X number of dollars per year. But as Dr. Moreno was saying, investment in city is an investment. It's not an expense. Handling, improving this, it's an investment that provides benefits compared to an investment in oil, but it's in terms of jobs, infrastructure, and indirect benefits such as the mitigation of climate change, keeping biodiversity, keeping water sources. These are big benefits. We should be changing our speech, and we should be saying that the expense of keeping biodiversity, we should change this narrative of the expense of these natural environment. It's rather an investment. It's an investment for also keeping our society to prevail our civilization as we've known it in the last hundreds of years. And now this should become, this is probably the biggest challenge that humankind has faced, maybe compared to nuclear holocaust. But well, I'm very glad to be here participating with you because cities can be these catalyzers. So what are some of the actions and solutions for this? Well, you've probably seen these before. I don't know how to move these.
Bueno, no, perdón. Es que quedó mi pantalla a la mitad, no muy bien.
I'm
Entonces,
sorry,
¿cuál
my
es el objetivo?
screen is in the middle. But what is the goal? The goal, I see four main goals
podemos ver
that we can see
en relación a la diversidad y las ciudades.
for
¿sí?
biodiversity and cities.
Uno de ellos, el
One
primero,
of them,
restaurar
the
las
first one is to
poblaciones
restore
de
and
especies residentes y especies
restore
migratorias. Por ejemplo, en la
populations
Ciudad de
of
México hay
resident
más
and
de
migratory
140
species.
especies de
We have
aves
more
que
than
viven en la ciudad, o que algo así,
740 species
viven
in
o
Mexico
usan la
City
Ciudad de México en
that
algún
live
momento, ¿sí?
in or come to
140
Mexico City.
especies, es una enorme, y es una de las ciudades más
It's a
grandes del
huge
planeta.
species, and this is one of the largest cities
Pero
in
la
the
Ciudad de
world.
México,
But
en su
Mexico
entorno,
City,
básicamente mineral,
in
tiene
its
esas
mineral
especies. Si
surrounding, it
contamos,
has
está
740
rodeada
species.
de una
It's
franja de
surrounded
bosques
by
muy
a stripe of
importante, el
very
número se
important
aumenta casi
forest,
a
and the
200
number
especies
expands to
que se
200
encuentran
species,
allí.
140
Entonces,
species,
lo primero
and
es
if we
restaurar y
look at the
mantener
surroundings, it's
sus
200. So first of all, we have to restore.
coletas aquí, por favor. El primero, restaurar y mantener
The
las
first one is to
poblaciones,
restore and
especies
to
de,
maintain the species, the
residentes y
populations,
migratorias.
the resident and
Lo
migratory
segundo
species.
es
Number
restaurar y
two
mantener hábitats,
is also to
ecosistemas,
restore
como
and to
hemos visto,
maintain habitats and
la idea de
ecosystems,
estas
as we've
alamedas,
seen,
o
the
la idea
idea of these parks,
reverdecer
or
hacer
making
más
green on
complejas
cities, or making
estos parques urbanos,
these
estas
parks more
regiones urbanas,
complex, these
nos
urban
ayuda
regions. This
básicamente
also
a
helps us
mantener
to
ecosistemas, no solamente ya
maintain
las especies de
ecosystems,
por
not
sí, de
just
plantas y animales, microorganismos, sino los
resident
ecosistemas en
species,
sí,
but also the
sus
whole
funciones también,
ecosystem
¿sí? Es
and their
fundamental
function.
en
So
este
it's also
enfoque,
key to
¿sí?
have this
Para
approach
mantener e incrementar
for
los servicios
maintaining and
ambientales
increasing
y todos los
environmental
beneficios que
services
obtenemos
and all the
de ellos, la
benefits
sociedad.
that we
No hay
get
manera
from it as a
que podamos
society.
mantener la
So
calidad
there's
de
no
vida
way of keeping our
humana
quality
y
of
nuestro
human
bienestar
life and
si
our
seguimos
well-being
deteriorando el medio
if
ambiente.
we keep
Cuando hablamos de un
harming
colapso,
the
la gente dice,
environment.
bueno, es que
When we
es muy
speak about
fuerte hablar de un colapso. El
collapse, they
colapso
say,
ya
well, that's very
empezó, y el
big.
colapso
Well,
son
that
esos
has already
2.000 o
started.
3.000
It
millones,
started
2.500 millones de personas que no tienen agua potable todos los días,
with people that
que
don't
no
have
tienen
running water every single day, or
suficientemente
people
alimento todos los días,
that do not
o
have
que
enough
son
food, or people
tienen que
that
convertirse en refugiados ambientales
have
por
to
el
become
impacto
environmental
del
refugees
cambio
because of the
climático,
impact
etcétera.
of climate change, etc.
Ya empezó ese colapso. El
So
colapso no
that
va a ser de
collapse
un
has
día para
already
otro. El colapso ya
started.
empezó,
Collapse is
estamos
not from
viendo
one day for the other.
muchas
It's gradual, and we already
situaciones que
see
están
it. We
ocurriendo.
see
Por
many
ejemplo,
things that are
leía un
happening now.
reporte, no
I was
sé
reading a report
qué
just
tan,
recently
unas predicciones a principios
and
de
some
año,
predictions at the
que
beginning of the
este año por
year
el
that
cambio
this year,
climático
because of
iba a
climate
haber
change,
en el
we were
Golfo
having
de México y en el
in the
Caribe,
Gulf of Mexico and in the Caribbean,
esta región de México,
in this
iba a
region of
haber
Mexico,
alrededor
we
de
were
30
having around
tormentas y
30
huracanes, ciclones y
storms and
huracanes, en
hurricanes
lugar de los 14
in,
que ocurren
compared to the
normalmente.
14 that
Ya se
we
mencionaba
regularly
aquí,
have.
por ejemplo, el impacto
And
que hubo
they speak about the
de dos
impact already.
huracanes
They've spoke
en
about
Acapulco.
the
El
impact
primero
of these two
llegó y
hurricanes in
devastó la
Acapulco. One
ciudad,
of them
pegó
just
directamente, sí.
touched
Y el
and it was
segundo
direct and
tuvo un
it
impacto
was
completamente
devastating. And the other one
diferente,
had a
porque en
total
el
different
primero
impact
se había
because the first
destruido
one,
el bosque que está alrededor de
the first one
Acapulco, y ese
destroyed
bosque, el que
the
le
jungle
permitía
around Acapulco, and that
mitigar
jungle
el impacto de
allowed
esas intensas
to
lluvias llegó
mitigate the
siguiente
impact of
huracán,
those rains.
llovió
Then we had the
muchísimo,
second
se
hurricane,
desbordaron los
we had a
cerros
lot of
y se
rain,
inundó la ciudad con una
mountains
muchísima
washed
agua,
off,
pero también con una
and the
capa
city
de material
flooded, but
mineral
we also
gigantesco.
had a huge layer of
Y bueno,
mineral
finalmente, como mencionamos aquí, una cosa fundamental
material.
de esto es
And
mantener
very
el
important thing as
enfoque,
well is
enfrentar el
to
cambio climático.
face
Yo
climate
leía
change.
recientemente
I
que, por
just
ejemplo,
read
en Medellín
that
han
in Medellin,
puesto
for
este
instance,
esfuerzo por revertir la ciudad
they
y han bajado
are working on
2
this
a
effort,
4 grados
and they've been able to
el
reduce
impacto
from
de la
4 to 2
temperatura.
degrees the impact
Imagínense
on
esto
temperature. Now,
coordinado ya
just
con
imagine
modelos
this coordinated
muy
with
sofisticados, lo que podríamos hacer,
sophisticated
podríamos
models,
lograr
what
que
we
las
could do, what we
ciudades
could
y sus
achieve in
entornos
cities,
tengan,
in their
puedan ser
surroundings, that their
mitigados
surroundings can be
enormemente
mitigated
por los efectos que va a haber del cambio
by
climático.
the effects
Unos
on
de ellos
climate
son
change. Some of them
la temperatura,
are
las
temperature,
lluvias, etcétera, pero otros la pérdida de la diversidad.
rainfall, but also the
Y
loss of
déjenme decir una cosa,
biodiversity. And
la
let me just tell
diversidad
you one thing.
biológica tiene
Biological
una
diversity
interacción
has
fundamental
interaction,
con el cambio
key
climático.
interaction
Entre
with
más
climate
pérdida de
change.
la biodiversidad,
The more
hay
loss
más
of
cambio climático.
biodiversity,
Entre más
the
cambio
more the
climático,
climate
más
change. And the
pérdida
more
de
the climate
biodiversidad.
change,
Es
more loss
decir,
of
estamos en
biodiversity.
una
So
situación en la
we're in a situation where we're able to mitigate the loss of one, we will mitigate, will stop the loss of other. And you probably have more experience than me on this, but let me tell you how we see this from Mexico. And it is that the action scale go from local to regional. For instance, this kind of buildings, green buildings that have this action that have to do with starting to recover nature, species at the local level. For instance, in Mexico, the National University has a program that has been adopted by some areas in the city. That's the pollination garden. So they give you the plants that are used by pollinizers, bees, hummingbirds, butterflies. I have them at home, and it's amazing the number of species that come. I've counted more than 17 species using this garden, and of individuals as well. At some point, we have even had 10 or 12 hummingbirds in this small garden. Now, just imagine these all over the city or in the surroundings of the city. The impact can be huge. So from regional, and this is a very specific example, to what Dr. Moreno spoke about. This is New York. This is very well known. In this park, they have discovered 2 new species for science in the past 8 years. Just imagine that. So that means they were all over the region and nobody saw them because nobody ever thought about going to an urban park such as Central Park in New York City. So just imagine, if we see the park over here, it's very beautiful, but then all the surroundings, it's just mineral. If we could start shifting this paradigm, bringing more green to these cities. And one of the most interesting examples would go from going from local to regional, and this is the Tijuca region in Rio de Janeiro. And this is one of the most interesting things. Mr. Ceballos, we're running out of time. Just give it 2 more minutes. Just sorry. And we have a lot of information available there. And yeah, we're about to finish. So yeah, changing this brings great benefits to all of us. It's a great challenge. It's a big challenge, but we have science, we have technology for doing so. Thanks so much. Apologies for the time. Yes, I'm sorry. Sorry, I'm interrupting you. But yeah, we wanted to thank you both. We wanted to thank Carlos Moreno and Gerardo Ceballos for this great presentation. They complement, and I'd like to have an exchange amongst you. So my proposal now is that Dr. Carlos Moreno, what idea come to mind after Dr. Ceballos' presentation of how to include the concept of biodiversity with proximity and resilience? And I'll ask the same question, and Dr. Gerardo, the same question to you just. Please go ahead, Dr. Carlos. I'm sorry, I cannot stay any longer because I have a meeting now in Medellin. They're just waiting for me. Gerardo, your presentation is amazing. I really admire the job you're doing and biosystems and yeah. And this is a very clear question. Biodiversity inspires us all the time. When speaking about proximity, we speak about a long-lasting proximity. We live in cities that are not sustainable. That is the word. Sustainability, when we speak about proximity, that means that we have to think that in each of our actions and reflections in the shift of paradigm, when speaking about this proximity, we need to think in proximity, not just proximity amongst human beings, but also of services, solidarity, and social bonds, but also proximity with living beings, animals, plants. And Gerardo spoke about this bacteria and microorganisms that are fundamental and that they represent the full chain. So how do we apply that? Gerardo showed this photo of Central Park in New York. With proximity, we have a program that's about creating every 300 meters, every 400 meters, green spaces. And we say that parks cannot just be big spaces in one space that you have to go, in a place that you have to go. And that this also makes our carbon footprint larger because we have to commute to go to a park. But our proposal is that biodiversity has to build all over the place. Every 300, every 400 meters, we should have spaces of nature. We should have park areas. In France, we have the experience of parks. We had closed parks. They were just ornamental parks, very well known. They're not very beautiful park, but the reality is that they open at some point in the morning, at some hour in the morning, and they close at night. But what we want is to have contact, a wider contact of all the people that live in a city with nature. And that's not just that they have to wait for someone to open the gate and that they close the gate, that opens in the morning and closes in the afternoon. And that's what we call open parks, permanent open parks of proximity. And we work so that citizens also practice crops and urban gardens to work in this agriculture. So some parks even have nature in a more natural state. It's not just nature coming to the city, but that the nature finds its natural space, that nature is of its own and that it creates its own ecosystems with its flora, with its fauna. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Carlos Moreno. What do you think about the proximity concept when it comes to the annihilation that you just discussed? I haven't heard this term at this level, and it's amazing, this term of proximity. And thanks so much, Carlos Moreno, for this conversation. And yeah, you're bringing concepts and words and biological corridors, these islands that we have. This is the theory. This is the geography of islands. We have these islands. We have to have more islands, and that reduces, of course, the size of the possibility of extinction of local species, and it also increases the number of possibilities of having more species and to connect them. And this thing of parks every 300 meters, it's also essential. It makes a lot of sense when it comes to basic science and ecology. And if we could also connect them, if we could, I don't know, have avenues with trees, lots of the species could connect, birds and migratory species could go there. So this is one of the ways that we should explore. For instance, these parks, well, Dr. Moreno spoke about this already, but they're trying also to keep biodiversity. And let me just tell you that I live in a city close to Mexico City, that's Toluca, and we convince the authorities that urban parks should not cut or prune all these trees because they are these pollination trees. And people complained at first, but biodiversity has expanded just because they're not pruning trees. And it's in just this area that they are very threatened by annihilation. And we have all these places that have these populations that are expanding. And well, what Dr. Moreno spoke about how they've articulated all these approaches, the closer, the better, the more we have, the better. And if we have all this biodiversity as a fundamental base at this scheme, what I only have to say is that this will keep us to have more biodiversity, to make cities more sustainable, to face problems better, such as climate change, keeping and maintaining species. But also, let me tell you that there are lots of studies that show that a fundamental way of reducing stress, depression, tension in cities is through approaching nature. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Gerardo. And I would like to say three things before closing. First of all, both presentations are based on solid research. We're speaking here of scientific work That's applied scientific work. It's applied in both cases. You spoke about cases of cities and territories and even of the planet, very specific examples that make us reflect on something that Gerardo said, how international organisms, whether it's UN-Habitat or CAF, require to develop an approach of attention to the urgency, this urgency of the massive destruction of biodiversity. So in Latin America, we have to think of viable models, and you gave very good examples about this. And on the one hand, we need to have plans, we have specific plans, and on the other hand, we need to have this partnership between technical organizations and financial organizations to materialize these plans, financially speaking, through different mechanisms. So from our end, we will close this block. We would like to thank you for your great presentations, and we would like to thank all participants as well. Thanks so much. Greetings. So long. See you later. Thanks so much, Dr. Fernando. Thanks so much for this space. That's been very interesting for this webinar. It's been very important to know directly from experts and from you, Fernando, about this reflection on how this is urgent to place cities as catalyzers for the conservation of biodiversity and its function for well-being, for mitigation of the impacts on climate change and the loss of biodiversity. Thanks so much for the three of you. And now we're passing to our next space. At first, we had some technical problems broadcasting the first part of the webinar, but the recording will be there available. Once that we finish with this webinar, we will include all the information and all the webinar since it started. So now we'll speak about the tools for participatory design of urban sustainable development. And our colleague from UN-Habitat, Rocío Boal, will be supporting us moderating this space. Lucille is a master in political science. She comes from the French Polytechnical Study Institute. She has a 10-year experience in projects connected to participatory citizen projects and urban development in Mexico, Central America, Chile, and France. Lucille and our colleagues will speak about some tools for making cities catalyzers where the conservation of biodiversity is the main element. So Lucille, the floor is yours, and thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time and availability for being part of this webinar. Thanks so much, Male. Welcome everyone to this expert panel for knowing tools for urban planning and participatory design of sustainable projects. And in this space, we have two experts from UN-Habitat and the Humboldt Institute will show a specific tool for participatory projects. And we will explore along with them innovative ways of including biodiversity in the solutions that are offered for creating sustainable urban areas and to know the best practices for enabling and guaranteeing inclusion and participation of key actors on the territory in the process of design of these solutions. So I'm really very glad to first of you introduce you to our first panelist. Welcome, Mario Baide. Let me read a little bit about you. Mario Baide is an architect and master in urban management with over 15 years of experience in urban planning in both the public and private sector. He has worked with international consultancy firms and cooperation agencies in Honduras and Central America. He is also a professor and coordinator in the architecture faculty at the University of Honduras, and he's currently supporting in UN-Habitat in the strategy for strengthening capabilities for urban development and improving informal settlements in Central America. And he also works in urban activities for marginal communities. And Diana Diana Ruiz from the program of the Humboldt Institute. Diana is a biologist with a master in conservation and the use of biodiversity, and she's a researcher of the program of urban gestion of biodiversity in the Humboldt Institute, and she is in charge of the work and proposal on the guidelines of the management of biodiversity for services and planification. And now that we've heard about our experts, I'd like to open the floor so that we explore with them all these tools and methodologies that they want to share with us. And because of time, I would ask you to take 7 minutes for each of your participations, and we would start with our colleague Mario Baide, who will speak about the methodology and the application in Latin America. So Mario, the floor is yours. Thanks so much, Luciel. It's an honor to be here in this event. Let me share my screen with you. Let me just know if you can see it.
Está bien, Mario, está proyectado.
Perfecto.
Adelante.
We can see it.
Ok,
We can
bueno,
see it.
muchísimas gracias,
Well,
Lucy,
thanks so
muchas
much.
gracias
Thanks so much.
a la red de biodiversidad
And thanks so much for the BiodiverCity Network for giving us this space in this third webinar that is aimed at showing tools that can be used for designing and development sustainable projects. So I'll try to share real quick and real briefly our experience with the methodology of urban operations, the integral urban operations in ONU-Habitat in Central America. So this has been work that we've done with our local counterparts, that they have provided with the opportunity of working with them in different neighborhoods of the region since 2022. And it's really very good to speak about our experience with these operations, and this has led to the development with these local governments, with communities, with different players. We have created 9 urban actions in different states. We have 50 strategic programs that try to have a systemic vision, a comprehensive vision of facing different challenges: housing, mobility, equipment, climate adaptation, governance, and these programs that we have created in these integral urban operations try to benefit directly 100,000 people in the region that live in these neighborhoods where we have these interventions. It's important to highlight that integral urban operations are based on a participatory experience, and we've been working in this process, and we have more than 120 participatory activities with different activities, different approaches, trying to adapt this to different publics and to different contexts and to the different methods of the methodology that we're working on. We have had 3,000 people involved, active people, for strengthening local capacities and also for implementing smaller actions, physical improvement, specifically neighborhoods. And these are short-term actions, but they are aligned and they're trying to boost the changes on the long term that's being proposed for these urban activities. So this way of working allows us to get very specific benefits, such as processes aimed at people, that comprehensive solutions are legitimate, because we're trying to build them collectively, that we strengthen local leaderships that already exist, and that we achieve early wins that help us consolidate this trust of populations in these kind of processes. Because, well, there are some first improvements that are tangible and there are visible impacts in the short term in communities. They have been left behind of urban development intercities. So, well, real quick, I'll try to define what are the urban operations. And beyond a plan of improvement in the neighborhood, this is a framework that's aimed at structuring urban sectors in a very direct way, and that's trying to trigger systemic and integral transformation. This is very important for the topic we're discussing today in this webinar and the different webinars that we've had, because We will see this later, that through a portfolio of strategic programs that has a comprehensive approach, a multidimensional approach, that we also include actions that can be aimed at recovering natural degraded spaces in neighborhoods or in the surrounding of the neighborhood, but that it also become new spaces for recreation, for people spending time together, that besides this benefit, they also have a benefits and enable mobility of people that use these services. So that's a little bit of the approach of the programs that we will be discussing real quick in this webinar. And a very relevant impact is that these urban operations include a series of tools that are aimed at moving from the idea to the implementation, not just having a very nice plan with very beautiful blueprints. We have a financial program, route for involving all stakeholders so that we can have these actions becoming a reality. And the participatory governance that includes a participation, preparing the participation in the process, the execution itself of the activities, that it also involves different levels and different sectors in this governance model. An important topic to highlight is that this urban operation is seen as the neighborhood, the region to trigger the urban transformation. Methodology has shown that it adapts to different urban contexts. And I won't stop here, but in this image, you can see three different cases, very different cases in Honduras, where in an area that has 22 neighborhoods in a coastal region compared to an urban dwelling in a small region of the country, or a precarious dwelling of the capital city. Well, in the three of them, we have applied the methodology, and this has led to the right adaptation. And you can review this methodology document later on in detail. I won't stop here, but these are the different stages. The stages where we sum up the process, and we have planning. It's part of a diagnosis, and from that diagnosis, then we set up our strategic topics. We create a long-term vision. We then try to work on specific programs that are very straightforward. And there are two different important things here to take into account: management and follow-up. And we'll have a quick view at that this is seen as a value added to this urban operation, and it's all implemented in this governance strategy. So we will then see some examples some areas that are quite representative of our model and that will connect to today's webinar. Well, this over here is a coastal city in Honduras, and one of the elements for understanding its urban evolution and the evolution of the system, and by that I mean the problems, the potential of transformation, was mainly to understand the natural water around it that shape the sector of the city and the problems that they face. So with a lot of local knowledge, we define strategies and actions that I'll be sharing real quick, and I will be also sharing these images that complement that work is not done by consultants. It's not even done by people from the municipalities. We try to build this model in all stages with people and through different modes of work. So since this is an urban operation, it includes social components, economic components, but I have two main objectives here. In the case of Tela Honduras, being part of this analysis of acknowledging the natural services around the area, but also identify the problems and to identify the potential areas to cover. And we have different actions, and it's not just conservation, natural conservation, but it also includes a comprehensive systemic vision that help us define the strategies for the integral urban operation. So these are some of the participatory activities we've had where we build these long-term strategies. And now when it comes to the full portfolio of integral urban operations, we have strategic programs. The most important thing to see is that they work properly for the improvement of the neighborhood. They're not too sectorial or by theme, but they try to be comprehensive. We create a network that is aligned to the features of the neighborhood and what the neighborhood prioritizes, and also the needs of the population. And this is the example of the portfolio. We have 5 large programs in this place, Nueva Capital. We have this cross-cutting program, and well, these are some of the actions that we've done in this region. We always work with the community, of course, for prioritizing these actions, and this is one of the programs that aims at implementing nature-based solutions aimed at bioremediation, at stabilization of slopes, and this leads to a network of corridors where people can share, people can move, and we are also increasing resilience of this community to the different threats that they face and the vulnerabilities that they have in this neighborhood. Likewise, speaking about housing, using ecological techniques for handling better water, having a better energy efficiency, but also aimed at covering the needs that these neighborhoods have, because they have a lack of access to different services. So we see ways of finding and solving these problems. I know that I have less than a minute, but real quick, I just want to close with this. In the integral urban operation, this last stage is very important. This is the key step for moving from the idea to action. And just real quick, I won't explain the full slide, but of the steps that we've been taking with the municipalities in order to understand and that they understand that they own the plan, so that they can strengthen these capabilities, so that they can implement all these actions, that they create partnerships, and that we have this. Since we're building, we're transforming the space, we have very small actions, temporary actions, but that little by little become into permanent actions where the communities, the local governments are also commitment. And I just close with this. Always in Central America are part of the processes that we already have, but they aim this planning for people and planning. And this approach also helps us build more resilient communities, because we know that we are in a very fragile environment that's vulnerable to threats, but that's also very rich, as mentioned in the previous slides. And I'll just close with this. I would like to invite you that you scan this QR code and that you download this document of this OUI methodology. It's still there. We are still reviewing it, but you also have an option to downloading all these summaries of urban actions that we've already closed, and other methodologies such as the toolbox for precarious settlements that might be useful for the municipalities that are part of the biodiversities. And I thank you so much for your attention, and apologies if I took too long. Now, thanks so much, Mario, for your presentation. Very useful presentation for our audience here. Now I'll pass the floor to Diana Ruiz for the second presentation. I'll share her presentation in a minute.
Ahorita algunos cambios, ¿te parece? ¿La puedo proyectar yo?
Claro que sí, sí, mejor.
Ver,
Entonces,
listo. Muchas
perfecto.
gracias.
Adelante, Diana. Muchas gracias.
Yeah, please
Bienvenida.
go ahead, Diana. Share your presentation if you want now.
Listo, bueno, muchas gracias.
Se ve su pantalla.
Well, thanks so much. We can now see your screen. Yeah.
Gracias a todos los que siguen
Thanks
conectados.
so much for everyone that's connected. Let me tell you about this tool that we built for Colombian cities based on different experiences that we have globally. We built this with different experts from different areas here in Colombia, but also with an implementation of a city. So this is a tool that has been tested on the territory. And this tool is called Cycle for the Management of Biodiversity in Urban Regions. So basically, this is the cycle of this tool. We built with pilot cities the tool. We built all these different phases, thinking on planning, on the territory, and thinking on the projects that cities were already doing. So we defined this cycle of 5 main stages: exploration, analysis, prioritize, plan, and implement. I'll tell you a little bit more about this later. And the cross-cutting processes, one of them that's very important, that's this monitoring. It's this purple phase that you see here, the mechanisms for follow-up, and all the process that's at the core of the topics of this webinar, and how to connect the different stakeholders through the cycle, how they connect, how we communicate the results of the process, so that citizens and all the stakeholders are well aware of what's happening when it comes to the management of biodiversity. The exploration stage is very important here in Colombia, because one of the challenges of cities that want to move forward on biodiversity and improving their own biodiversity is basically this capacity. We have smaller technical teams, sometimes we don't have enough tools. So this exploring stage allows cities to explore those capacities that they have, so that they get to know them, and that they can approach the remaining cycle thinking on easier methodologies and smaller projects or short-term projects that can allow them to move forward without having the need of all the resources or the tools that larger cities have, or cities that have more resources for this. Then we have the analysis stage, and our proposal includes 2 main methodologies. One of them has to do with the governance of biodiversity in each city, these and how people are having a relation with biodiversity, who is in charge of handling all these, what are the resources invested in these, how local universities are part of it, how civil society organizations participate. So this is the structure of governance around biodiversity. And other methodologies aim at the mapping of ecosystem services, inventories of biodiversity, and very easy tools, so that all people can understand how biodiversity of their city is composed, identifying challenges and opportunities specific for each of the territories. Now, on the stage of prioritization, we have an important part where stakeholders are very important, where they think the city of the future through the 5 commitments of biodiversity. And I'll tell you more about those 5 commitments. So the stakeholders get together and they prioritize those projects or those actions based on the inputs that they have on this stage 2 of analysis. So they have this vision so that they can prioritize short and long-term actions. And then for stage 4 of planning, they already have an action plan very well put in place. What are the tools required for implementing? And it's important to connect the whole mechanism of follow-up and assessment for having an implementation with this very well-established system that responds to the needs of people and the specific challenges that the city might face. So this is the cycle, and I won't elaborate on all the stages. Each of the stages has different tools, very practical tools, so that cities can move forward. And cities do not have to implement the full cycle. There are some cities that are just interested in having tools for prioritizing on the basis of biodiversity. So each stage can work on a separate basis, and they can issue different recommendations and methodologies. And 2 of the stages that I like to highlight that have been better accepted, or that they're innovative in Colombia. The first one is this one, that's the identification and the specific, well, we run this quick self-diagnosis, so the city identifies itself in 3 levels of progress: a citizen that's a city that's entrepreneurial, a city on its way, and then we can have a very clear route, or a city that's a precursor. So this is how we create a technical team connected to biodiversity or challenges such as water management, and understanding all the needs of management, and understanding all the institutional needs that the city should be doing for proposing options that are viable for each of the territories. So after this classification, they can adopt the rest of the methodology and to start identifying key areas, understanding the territory, and to start moving from there. So these levels allow to keep these steps. So we got this questionnaire that's based on pillars that are key for the right management of biodiversity, the right management of biodiversity, and one of them is knowledge and innovation around biodiversity, to have information, the necessary information for the decision-making process, and they have to connect this to all stakeholders that are connected to the management of ecosystems, how the biodiversity investment is done, the partnerships that they have, the public-private partnerships, for instance, and then how this is reflected in planning tools, management, and follow-up tools specific for biodiversity management. So you can explore the questionnaire. It's sort of a checklist with all these different variables that are basic for a biodiversity. Now, assessment and monitoring stage. This is a very interesting stage as well, and it's been well accepted by cities because we have identified that gap can impact. There are some cities that have made some progress, but it's difficult for them how this has a positive impact or not on biodiversity and human well-being. So we have this system of follow-up. This is a proposal done with different experts in the region, and that's based into conceptual models that are relevant for biodiversity, such as the pressure, state, response, and benefit report or model, that how we can improve the state of biodiversity, how this leads to a response, and how management and governance modify depending the needs around biodiversity, and how we increase the benefits for the population as a whole. So with these principles of this model of pressure, state, response, and benefit, the PER model, they can assess the impacts of biodiversity. And the other model or conceptual framework is the theory of change. So that cities can also project themselves with specific goals for the long, short, and short term, and that they understand that all actions can progress on that path. So they can become a biodiverse city, and how they can analyze this and how can they assess this progressively. Now, you can also find this in the tools. We have different indicators that include these categories of this model, the PERB. It has to do with ecosystem systems, the status of biodiversity, how cities are reducing pressures, thinking in pollution, for instance, in urban expansion, in the ecosystem degradation, and how are the response on that. So we have different indicators for those 4 components. And we also split these indicators in basic indicators and some other complementary indicators, so that there's different levels where cities can also know more about these methodologies and indicators of each of the one that they can implement in the cities. And those indicators, they pick up all the indexes or the global indexes, so that cities can also move forward and to contribute to these global agendas, and that they also provide these separate indicators. So we have included the SDGs, the Singapore Index, the Index of Biodiversity, but of course adapted to the context of each of the cities and their capabilities.
Bueno, como les conté ya para ir cerrando, esto lo implementamos en 6
So we
ciudades intermedias
implemented
en
this
Colombia.
in 6 middle
Y
cities
pues
in
fue muy
Colombia.
interesante porque nos permite,
And this
por
is
un
very
lado,
interesting
usar la
because it
herramienta,
allowed
pero
us
también
to
pues que las
adjust
ciudades
the
arrancaran
tool,
en ese
but also that
camino.
cities
Y
started on this
aprendimos
path.
pues algunas
And
cosas.
we
Primero,
learned some things
las
about
ciudades
this. First of
son
all,
diversas, son
cities
biodiversas,
are
contrario a lo que
biodiverse,
pues
opposed
tradicionalmente se cree, y es que las
to
ciudades
what
son,
they
han
believe
desplazado la biodiversidad y
that
detectamos
cities have
bastantes relaciones positivas
displaced
con la biodiversidad,
biodiversity.
premios a especies interesantes,
But we
ecosistemas
discovered the
conservados,
opposite, that we have
efectivamente
ecosystems
nuestras
that are
ciudades
very
son
well
diversas.
conserved. So our
Es algo que
cities
se
are
debe reconocer.
biodiverse, and this is something to be
Falta
acknowledged, of
conocer más
course.
sobre la
We still
biodiversidad
need to
urbana,
know more
entonces
about urban
entender las
biodiversity in cities
dinámicas
to
asociadas a los
understand the
procesos
dynamics
biológicos,
connected to
cómo se están
biological
adaptando las
process and
especies a
how
estas
species
condiciones.
are adapting to
La
conditions.
biodiversidad es a escala regional, esto es muy
Biodiversity
importante
is at the
porque
regional level,
digamos que en
and this is
términos
quite
administrativos
important
las ciudades
because
suelen gestionar hasta su límite
cities are
urbano
managed
y desde
to
luego
an
regular es
urban
fundamental empezar a
limit,
pensar este
but it's very
paisaje
important to
urbano
start thinking in
regional y
this
cómo se generan
urban
esas redes a una
sightseeing and
escala
how we
mayor, no
connect
solamente
networks
pues, con el
at a
límite
larger
político
scale and not
administrativo
just at
urbano.
the political
El
urban
agua y la gestión del
borders.
agua es una
Now,
oportunidad para
water
regular
management is an
toda la
opportunity.
gestión de ecosistemas
Water
o
is
toda la
also an
conservación
option
de la
for connecting
biodiversidad.
the
Entonces, digamos que
biodiversity.
ecológica, por
So
ejemplo,
the
en
ecological
las
connectivity,
ciudades
for
colombianas
instance,
esto se
in
entendía muy
cities,
desde los cuerpos de agua, los
we have
corredores también asociados a
different
quebradas,
corridors connected to
humedales.
bodies of water, also connected
Existen
to
instrumentos
wetlands.
para gestionar la
There are
biodiversidad,
tools for
instrumentos
managing
de planificación y gestión
biodiversity,
que son un punto
tools for
de
urban
arranque y
planning
son un
that
buen
are
comienzo, pero
a
es
good
fundamental
point for
asegurar la
starting. But it's
continuidad
important to make
entre
sure that
los
we have
gobiernos y
continuity
entre las
amongst
visiones
government
para mantener
and
esa
the
visión a
visions to
futuro
keep that
y la
vision on the long
articulación
term,
también entre
and
todos
the
los
articulation as
actores
well of all
interesados, no solo
stakeholders
pues con la
involved,
ciudadanía
not
y los
just
colectivos,
citizens
el
and
sector privado, sino
collectives,
también
but also private
internamente
sector
en las
and also
municipalidades, en las
internally
alcaldías,
in the
esa relación
municipality
entre secretarías de
and in the
planeación,
government, this
secretarías de ambiente.
relationship of the
Los
all
proyectos
the
pueden ser
ministries.
pequeños, muchas
Projects
ciudades que
might be
empiezan este
small. Many
camino
cities
a
that are
convertirse en
already
biodiversidades, tal
starting
vez
to
piensan
work in
que
becoming
no tienen los recursos
biodiversities,
suficientes para
they think that
avanzar,
they
que
might
sus
not have enough
proyectos son a escala
resources
muy
for moving
pequeña, pero
forward,
cualquier
that their
proyecto
projects
también
are
puede ser
small,
válido y aportar desde
but
la
their
escala, como lo que
projects are also
estamos viendo
valid and they
ahorita,
can also
desde la escala de barrio y luego la escala de
start
ciudad.
working
No hay
at the
proyectos
neighborhood
pequeños.
so there are
Y
no
solo
small
para contarles
projects.
algunos de
And
los
just to
proyectos
tell
que
you
las
some of
ciudades
the
identifican como
projects
proyectos de
the
biodiversidad,
cities identify as
son todo
biodiversity
lo
projects
asociado a educación
have to do
ambiental, jardines
with
botánicos,
educational,
biodiversidad y
environmental
arte. Esto, digamos
education,
que jardines botánicos es un
botanical
centro de
gardens,
innovación
green
y
corridors, and these
articulación con
places
otras
for
disciplinas como el
articulating
arte
with other
o
disciplines
como
such
la
as
educación
art,
ambiental. Todo lo que tiene que ver con corredores verdes y
everything that
muy
has to
asociado a la
do
gestión del recurso hídrico también,
with
quebradas,
green
humedales,
halls
ríos,
and corridors, rivers,
renaturalización,
wetlands,
tanto de barrios que han sido muy
working
empobrecidos y que
on
requieren
making
cambiar
cities green
suelo por
again,
suelo
that
blando,
require
volver
to
a sembrar
change
árboles, como
hard
de las
soil
quebradas y los
for
cuerpos de agua que han sido
soft
canalizados
soil,
y que
for
hoy
planting
tienen
new
esa necesidad,
trees, and
pero
for
requieren pues
channeling
tecnología para hacerlo,
water
y también
bodies
pues
that
todo lo
require
asociado a
technology
gestión
for this, and
del
everything
agua, por
connected
ejemplo,
to
ecosistemas
water,
urbanos de
water
drenaje
management,
sostenible,
with
humedales
sustainable drainage in
artificiales,
cities, artificial
todo lo que tiene
wetlands.
que ver también con concentración del agua. Ya voy a cerrar.
Perdón, Diana. Perdón. Sí,
I'm
creo que
sorry,
nos queda un
Diana.
minutito para cerrar.
We
Y
have just 1 minute left.
simplemente
Yes,
pues
thanks.
aquí con
And
este QR pueden
well,
mirar, tenemos un libro
this
que es el
QR,
ciclo
you
completo
can
de manera
download
general,
this book,
y
that's
tenemos
the
algunos
whole
anexos,
cycle. And we have some other
un
annex
anexo enfocado
that
en
you can
qué es
also
lo que
download.
significa
One of
analizar la
them
biodiversidad
aim
en
at
los distintos
analyzing
contextos en áreas urbanas,
biodiversity
digamos que lo
and the
mínimo, y cómo
ecosystemic
entendemos la
services in
biodiversidad
urban
urbana,
areas and how we
una
understand
metodología
urban
para hacer estudios de
biodiversity, also
gobernanza desde la
methodology
perspectiva
for the
social,
analysis of
participativa de la
governance on
acumulación
the
y cooperación entre los
participatory
actores, y finalmente un
of
anexo
different
que es todo el
stakeholders. And the
mecanismo de
last one, Annex
seguimiento o
3,
los
that's a
mecanismos
mechanism of
como el
follow-up
sistema de evaluación de
of
monitoreo
actions
que
for the
proponemos para que las
management of
ciudades cumplan
biodiversity
acciones
for urban
en pro de
areas,
la biodiversidad.
so that
Pueden encontrar
cities work
esta
in
herramienta que
the
les
benefit of
presenté hoy,
biodiversity.
y
So this
tenemos
is a
también un
tool that
micrositio
I
que
just
no, pues
spoke
que no está
about it.
centrado
And we
únicamente en
also
esta
had this
herramienta,
microsite that
pero recogemos
where we work,
experiencias también prácticas
this
de ese
experience, but we
impacto,
have
entonces
practical experiences as
experiencias
well.
sobre monitoreo de la
We have experience
biodiversidad,
of
algunos
monitoring
planes
biodiversity
concretos
on specific
enfocados
plants,
específicamente en
aim
biodiversidad, no
specifically at biodiversity, not just for Colombia, but also at the regional level. So if you want to explore not just what's connected to this tool, but other experiences that we've had in Colombia and Latin America, we have this microsite available that's called Ciudades by Biodiversity.
Muchísimas gracias, Diana.
Thanks so much,
Pues no me
Diana.
queda más que agradecer profundamente a nuestros dos
So I'd
panelistas,
like to
Mario,
thank very
Diana,
much our
por compartir
speakers,
estas valiosas
Mario,
herramientas
Diana, for sharing
muy
these
complementarios
amazing
en sus
tools
procesos. Creo que resaltan
that they
la
complement,
importancia de
and I
presentar
think that they
soluciones
highlight the
integrales,
importance of
de hecho, sustentar el diseño y la
showing
implementación
sustainable
en estrategias de
solutions
gobernanza participativa
for
transversales que van
having
hacia temas de
these
justo
cross-cutting
y también dar las
strategies,
condiciones para
and also
pasar de la
that provide the
idea
conditions from moving from the idea to an action with
articulación entre ellos.
articulation amongst
Creo
them.
que no más
And
tiempo, pasaría la
I
palabra a
would
nuestro
now
moderador para
pass
seguir
the
con el-
floor to our
con el
moderator
resto del webinar.
to continue
gracias.
with the
Vamos.
remaining of the what's left of
Muchas
today's
gracias
webinar.
también a
Thanks so
Lucila,
much.
Diana
Thanks
y
so
a
much,
Mario,
Lucille, Diana,
que
Mario.
nos han presentado justamente
Thanks
estas
so
valiosas
much
herramientas.
for these
Y
very
al
valuable
respecto de las
tools.
cuales agradecemos el
And
interés
we
de nuestros
also like to
participantes
thank
en el
our
siguiente webinar.
participants that are
Les
following the
recordamos que
webinar. We'd like to
tanto los
remind
links
you
a las
that both the
diversas
links
herramientas que nos han
to the
presentado
different
nuestros
tools
panelistas
that our
serán
speakers have
respondidas o serán
shown
incluidos dentro de
will
los
be
comentarios
included
de la
also
grabación de
in
este
the
webinar.
recording
Y también sus
comments,
preguntas que nos están
and
haciendo llegar a través del
your
chat
questions, the
que
questions that you're
recibimos,
sending us,
pues también serán remitidas a
will
nuestros
be
ponentes, a nuestros expertos,
also sent
y
to
en
our
breve les
speakers,
estaremos dando
and
respuesta.
we will be
Por
soon
ahora vamos a
answering
dar
them.
paso a nuestro
And now we're
tercer
moving to our
momento de este
third
webinar,
moment of today's
en
webinar.
donde pues se trata de una mesa de diálogo de ciudades
It's
con
a
experiencias sobre cómo la
dialogue table of
incubadoras de
cities with
proyectos pueden
experiences
ser clave
in
para apoyar
and
a
how
emprendedores,
project
urbanistas,
incubators can be key to
comunidades
support
en las
entrepreneurs,
primeras
urban
etapas de
planners, and
desarrollo,
communities in the early
proporcionando
stages of
recursos, mentoría y
development,
conexiones
providing
estratégicas.
resources, mentoring,
Para
and
ello, le
strategic
doy la
connections.
bienvenida a Marta
And to that
Castillo,
end,
quien
I
es
welcome
directora
Martha Castillo,
principal
Senior
de
Executive,
asesoramiento técnico en
Technical
biodiversidad
Biodiversity and
y
Biodiversity and Climate
además
Technical
también es
Advisory at
economista
CAF.
con maestría en
She is also an
ciencias
economist
naturales.
with a master's degree in
A lo largo de sus
environmental
últimos
and
15
natural
años ha
resources, and over the
trabajado en
last
materia
15
de
years, she has
climático,
worked in the
apoyando
field
la
of climate
formulación y
change,
aplicación de
supporting the
políticas,
formulation and implementation of
programas e
policies,
incentivos
programs,
orientados a promover
and
proyectos
incentives
sostenibles
aimed
para
at
mejorar el
promoting
impacto
sustainable
ambiental.
projects from a
Ha sido
climate
colaboradora del
perspective.
Ministerio de
She's
Medio
been a
Ambiente y Medio
collaborator of the
Ambiente
Colombian
y
Ministry
pues
of
desde hace algún
Environment,
tiempo trabaja
and
en
for
el Banco de
some time
Desarrollo de
already,
América
she
Latina y
has
el
worked
Caribe.
at the
Es
Development
una de las
Bank of
principales
Latin America and the
autoridades
Caribbean, one of the
científicas
main
de la
sources
región,
of
enfocada
multilateral
en temas de
financing in the
sostenibilidad y
region,
financiamiento.
focusing on sustainability and
Marta,
climate
bienvenida.
finance.
Muchísimas gracias por
Martha,
participar
welcome.
en este
Thanks so much
webinar.
for being part
Te
of this
cedo la
webinar.
palabra para la moderación de este
The
espacio.
floor is yours.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias por la
Thanks so
presentación.
much. Thanks so much for this
Muchísimas
presentation.
gracias por la invitación a participar en este
Thanks
panel y
for
acompañarnos con esta
inviting me to be
moderación.
part of this
Y
model and
también
to
muchísimas gracias a los panelistas que nos
help you. And
acompañan
thanks
el día
also,
de hoy.
and thanks so much
Después de
for
haber escuchado los primeros
speakers
momentos
that
del
are
día
here
de
today.
hoy,
After
creo que llegamos
listening
un
to the
poco a
presentations
lo que todos queríamos un
of
poco escuchar
today,
y
we're
es
now
qué
at
ha
what we
pasado,
wanted
cuál es
to
la
hear.
experiencia de
What
proyectos que
is
se
the
están
experience? What
implementando
are
en
the
este
projects that
momento.
are being
Y para eso tenemos
implemented
hoy día
now?
tres
And we
panelistas.
have
El
three
primero, y me va a permitir presentarlos, es
speakers.
Ricardo Vives,
And first of
arquitecto
all, we have
colombiano con
Ricardo
trayectoria
Vives,
en proyectos de
Colombian
ciudad.
architect with an
Cuenta con
outstanding
estudios en
trajectory
la
in city
Universidad
project.
Estatal de
He
Carolina del
completed his
Norte,
first
la
year
Universidad de Los
of
Andes,
undergraduate program
máster
at
en desarrollo sostenibilidad y diseño urbano en
North Carolina
Italia
State
y en gobernanza
University.
innovadora para grandes
In
sistemas
addition,
urbanos
he earned a
en
master's degree in
Suiza.
design from
Tiene
the School of
también más de 13
Polytechnica
años de
in
experiencia
Italy,
laboral y se ha desempeñado en roles
and he
destacados en
has
proyectos
13 years of experience. And
urbanos,
Ricardo has played leading
tanto a
roles in
nivel nacional
projects
como
both
internacional
nationally and
y a nivel
internationally.
local,
And
particularmente en proyectos
locally,
en
he's
Colombia.
recognized
Igualmente,
for projects in
bienvenido Ricardo,
Colombia.
muchas gracias por
Welcome,
aceptar nuestra
Ricardo. Thanks so
invitación.
much for
En
accepting
segundo
our
lugar, nos
invitation.
acompaña Oscar Guevara,
Then
Oscar es
we have
ingeniero civil,
Oscar Guevara,
máster en
a civil
economía
engineer,
ambiental y
master
de recursos
in
naturales
environmental
y
economics and
también
natural
magíster en
resources,
administración de riesgos y
master in risk and
desastres,
disaster
también
management,
doctorado en
and
sostenibilidad y durante su
PhD
trayecto
candidate in
profesional ha ocupado
sustainability. In his
diversas
professional career,
posiciones,
he has held
consultor
various
panelista
positions,
nacional e
and he's a
internacional
national and
en gestión de
international
riesgos,
consultant and lecturer
gestión
in climate
ambiental y
change,
políticas
risk
públicas enfocadas en
management,
desarrollo.
environmental management,
Actualmente,
and public
Oscar nos
policies
acompaña en la
focused
CAF
on
como
development.
ejecutivo principal en la
He
Gerencia de Acción
currently
Climática y Biodiversidad
serves as
Constructiva.
senior executive in the
Es
management of
nuestro
climate
punto
action for
focal
capacity
ante el
diversity
Fondo
of
de
CAP.
Adaptación ante la Convención de Cambio Climático y también lidera la
Where he's currently the focal point of the portfolio of climate change adaptation project and the cross-cutting agenda on disaster risk management. And number 3, we also have today Isabel Tamriz. Mata is an environmental engineer with a master's degree in environmental law and diploma in public governance and innovation And she's deeply interested in conservation, and this has motivated her to participate in projects for the recovery of dry forest ecosystem, mangroves, and wetlands in several coastal provinces in Ecuador. She is the general director of the environment in the municipality of Guayaquil. Thanks so much for accepting this invitation. We are very tight with time, so the idea of this dialogue is to see how we've had projects in practice. I mean, moving from the idea to action in the incubation of specific projects. We will try to have 2 rounds of questions. One first general question for each of you from the perspective of what you approach in these projects. And Maria Elena, just let me know if we have time. We will go to a second round with very specific questions of each of these experiences. So, given the time we have, I'd like to start by Ricardo. Ricardo, tell us a little bit about the tools or incubation strategies that can help us execute projects and that they're not just at a conceptual stage. We have very good ideas, we have great ideas, but sometimes they need a little boost for moving into this concept into a concrete idea. Thanks so much, Martha. Hi. Yes, I'll try to be as brief as possible. And what we've seen is that we have 2 very key strategies moving from planning to action. And the first of them, we work from being optimistic, and I don't want to be pessimistic, but in Latin America and in most of the emerging countries, we don't have the luxury of having those big budgets and those specific budgets that countries from other places might have, where, for instance, for biodiversities or sustainability, they have a good budget that can be used for that. What happens in Latin America is that when we come up with this vision of biodiversity or mobility or whatever the case is, we have more reluctancy when it comes to the approval and the implementation, even from early stages when projects require some budget for planning, study, design, formalization, feasibility, pre-feasibility, and so forth. So what has worked very well for us and what we're trying to implement is that every single cent in public expenditure has to have different effects, and that multiplicity of shooting one bird with one single shot. And the project can be a project of urban resilience because it has a protection barrier against floodings, but it can also be for connecting an area of the city that was not connected. It can also be a park. It can be lots of things. And those different stages that a project can have, they're very good for bringing resources, for getting the support of the communities and of different sectors of the audience that will be listening to each, what they care more about the project. So that's the first measure. And the second measure is that we have also tried to develop methodology that includes a concept, feasibility, and development of projects that in each of the stages, there are different stages or steps, different steps, strict steps where, for instance, expectations, the different approval steps of each of the projects start happening when they till the moment they're ready. And that what happened. We don't have the 4 dimensions aligned, the 4 dimensions that we see in projects, and that is the universe where the feasibility of projects is. And these 4 dimensions are what we have to do that's somehow easy to do in territories. We have statistics, we have all this information available It's public information. It's something that all territories have to do. That's somehow easy to do. Number two is what we are allowed to do with the budget. That, of course, it's the financial reality of each of the territories, and it's different. And sometimes we don't have the necessary resources for doing what we need to do, or to do part of the things that we need to do. And sometimes we have resources for other things. And the number three, the third dimension, is the political component, the social component, the part of enabling this project publicly. And this is what sometimes politics enable things. Sometimes we find things that are unfortunate for moving forward in a project where there is political opposition and things should not be happening, but that's a reality. And we have to be very clear and moving in that dimension of what politics enable and what people want. Unfortunately, what people sometimes want is not what we can do or what politicians want to promote. So in the end, trying to connect these four dimensions allows a project to be approved faster from rejection to idea to implementation. Thanks so much, Ricardo. You've spoken about very important things, and we've seen this part of the initial concept, enabling this dialogue amongst different stakeholders, but also how this conceptualization can be done through phases that might require those comprehensive elements of the solution, but also to see them in stages, because the solution might not be done in a period of a government. So we do this in stages. We can have a commitment on the short term and another one on the long term that can enable this full solution. And you spoke about something very important, and that is that green light of communities. So, Oscar, from the experience of international funds, the adaptation fund that require very active participation of the community, that the community is part of that solution, how can we guarantee that the solutions proposed, that besides being innovative because of the topics and what you're presenting here, how can they also be accessible for all populations, mainly the most vulnerable ones? Thanks so much, Marta. Can you hear me well? Yes, just fine. Good, perfect, great. Well, thanks, Ricardo, for your first answer, because I'd like to add on one of the messages that he just shared. And this has to do with the financing opportunities and the reality that projects have, both for political life, for guidelines, and mainly from the role, the financial, the possibility of financing is very important. And I'm speaking about this because in our current context, from the CAF perspective, that it's aiming at becoming the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean. So we mainly speak about the meaning of green financing, and this green financing that has a positive impact in communities and mainly from the climate and biodiversity. And this also means that projects that maximize opportunities and this biodiversity network of having a positive impact on biodiversity, but also they have the possibility of having a positive impact on mitigation or adaptation, and they end up having more possibilities of having more resources, more financing, and of course, this is in benefit of communities that can reduce the different factors of vulnerability that they face. So it becomes a virtual cycle where we have the needs of the community but we also bring the needs of the community in the context of creating projects, of creating strategies connected to a green impact and also for the mobilization of a green financing. So when we are able to bring these two dimensions together, we build projects that have a very important impact. And for this webinar, we were invited to share an experience, and we have this binational experience with Uruguay. But for answering this question, well, it's very important that since we start designing, we maximize the participation of communities and we find benefits. And that's one of the most appealing components, because from CAF and from other institutions, we can improve the possibility of mobilizing resources such as the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund or other funds. And it means that besides having this traditional financing, we can have opportunities that are reimbursable, opportunities that are donations for materializing the needs that different cities have. And I would like to speak about the great interest of intermediate cities that have been granted financing. Thanks so much. Thanks so much. You've spoken about very important things, about these key stakeholders that we see in the communities that are accompanying the project, and that, as Ricardo was saying at first, what is it that people want? How to accompany people? What can we do, technically speaking, and how to have a comprehensive answer? And when it comes to that comprehensive response, Isabel, if you can help us, and if you can tell us a little bit about the role that collaboration amongst private, public, and community stakeholders play in the incubation of urban projects. Very interesting listening to my colleagues that have elaborated on how the public domain works, but translating this into how we, as a public institution, or for decentralized autonomous governments, such as our case, as a municipality, we have the possibility of empowering communities through an order. We can empower NGOs, organizations, communities, because yes, it is true that based on the regulations, the municipality itself is the one that has to create its own working plan and to execute this working plan. And I think that Ricardo spoke about this, that in some cases it was complicated to execute all the planning stage, all the budget stage, and how this becomes a problem. And the municipality understood this at some point. And then also at CAF, where sustainability and well, we now generations that are fully involved in participation for the conservation of natural resources. So on that end, we work in this order that's called environmental challenges, and this order works as an incubation, and this allows us to set different areas. We have 6 main areas, and we work in these main 6 areas. We have environmental tourism, packaging with a circularity approach, environmental education, technology, and additional areas. But what we do is to empower communities and other stakeholders as well, so that they can bring their own proposals and to move forward in different stages till we filter and reach these different 6 categories. So this allows us to have partners in the territory, partners are foundations and NGOs, and the award, beyond being an economic reward, is that we will accompany through all this implementation, and after it by the municipality. There's accompaniment for these different initiatives. And I think that we're now in the 5th edition, and as a municipality, we have the opportunity of creating different environmental leaders. And that's a very interesting thing to work as an incubation, because we're allowing people that work in the environmental sector with their own different initiatives. Sometimes they do not have the seed capital to start their project. So this space is the space that allows them to bring these ideas and make them a reality. And now we're in a stage in the municipality for 2025. So besides recreating the way in which this project worked and that we have as a municipality, also we have the goal of this municipal public company that's called Epicot, and this company is in charge of the incubation of different initiatives and entrepreneurial projects. And we want to knock on the door of all the winners of previous editions and to get to know and to approach them and to know how they're doing. Some of them are still working on their different initiatives, but many others might require this additional push and technical assistance as well. So for 2025, what we will try to do is to keep accompanying these different stakeholders and to allow others in Guayaquil, for instance, that are environmental leaders, environmental activists, NGOs. We have a huge network. Guayaquil is a city with more than 3 million inhabitants, so we have lots of stakeholders. We have mangrove, we have dry forest, and we have different resources. So we have lots of people passionate in the conservation of all of this. But sometimes the municipality or different stakeholders working in public institutions might make the mistake of saying, I have to execute everything. And yes, of course, we have to do that. Based on my competencies, I have to do so. But I can also empower communities and just different stakeholders so that they help us respond better on problems that we have in our own jurisdiction. So this has been a little bit of the vision that the municipality has had, and thank God it's been very successful. Thanks so much. Isabel just spoke about a very important thing, having this articulation amongst the different key stakeholders of the city, and you have this defined by an order. So with the clear rules so that everyone get to know them and that they can work in the space that's for everyone. Now, Ricardo, coming back to you, and in the Q&A session of specific projects based on the experience in Barranquilla. And when it comes to urban resilience, how did you integrate in the project elements that would harmonize with the municipal plan versus what you identified as those opportunities of sustainability? Because, well, the municipal development plans also might have other drivers, other incentives, but well, in the end, that's the route that they will follow. So we need to find this harmonization, how to get this harmonization in the projects promoted in Barranquilla. Well, 2 examples. The first one, you might know it in Barranquilla. This is a lineal project of riverfront, a 5-kilometer project. And what I mentioned in my first participation and what Martha spoke about this project, how to make these projects more affordable when it comes to time. And well, the case was the following. There was a waterfront that was becoming a place for warehouses, and that waterfront in the development plan had also an invitation for urban renewal of some of the places. It had different indicators. And there was also this invitation for improving quality of life, investing in parks and schools and different sectors of the city. So what we tried including was to look at all the checkpoints of the development plan and to see what could be connected. And that was the first intervention, that a project has to be lots of things. There was an invitation to working on the areas that flooded the most. There was also an invitation to improve public spaces. So there was a need for parks. So there was also an invitation for improving connectivity of some sectors of the city that were becoming an area of robbery. So we had all these dimensions together. And the proposal was to build this waterfront, that's a protection, so that these 180 hectares of the city that were an area that used to flood, to a measure of 100 years return. So all the river basin, to have everything in place so that we could protect this area of the city. And also we created parks for protecting the edge. We also created pathways. It's not as easy as I just described it. It was a little longer, but it was the idea to look in the development plan, all these invitations, and to try to do works that are multifaceted that would allow to do this. And then there's other work that's very important. Something we're doing here in Barranquilla, the Ciénaga of Mallorquín. This is a project that had a similar approach. It is a 10, 15-year project. It's a project of more than 900 hectares of a coastal mangrove area where we have the river, the Caribbean, and there's a lagoon where we have a beautiful mangrove environment. And it was very damaged and deteriorated by informal dwellings. And trying to solve this big problem is a 15-year solution, and it requires millions and millions of dollars. So how in the development plan, with everything that they ask for, you kind of find a sequence of functional unity. We like that word very much. That's not by stages. These functional units are pieces that can be assembled. So these are finished units that work by themselves, and that they let the other part to start later. So these are stages of a single project. So these are pieces that can be connected to the rest of the project. That's how we see it. Now, in the Ciénaga de Mallorquín, in that area of intervention, well, we of course had problems with remediation, or the quality of water, with protection for the mangrove, potential of touristic exploitation. So we studied all the area. We created these functional areas that they tackled some part of the problem. We checked some of the parts, and it all worked as a comprehensive recovery. So we see projects that you probably know, like the Eco Park of the Ciénaga de Mallorquín. And the idea is to create or to protect this ciénaga of the mangrove region with citizen surveillance, putting citizens in contact with something that they did not know, creating a park for them. So there's protection of the mangrove, there's investment in public spaces, and it's the same thing with these other 8 components of the recovery project of the Ciénaga de Mallorquín. Thanks so much, Ricardo, and what you just mentioned. And it's the things that seem to be very important. One of them is multi-purpose solutions or multifaceted solutions that respond to the different objectives in the territorial development plans. And also in the Ciénaga de Mallorquín, this unit started as a unit. That's like the cherry in the cake, that you show the best thing that you'll get, but in order to complement all this functional unit, you have to show like the full crown of what could be bringing shine, and that requires, and this also articulates other stakeholders of the city. Thanks so much, Oscar. Besides the challenges that we have already discussed and that Isabel discussed about the Guayaquil case, there are projects where we have these ecosystems, and not just the challenge of the ecosystem itself, but the binational challenges. So in this project of Rio Uruguay, what are the strategies that you use for structuring the project and to make it more appealing to the different stakeholders to have the right execution of the project? Because Ricardo has discussed this. Well, we have to accept stakeholders since the beginning, but besides stakeholders and the city, we have two countries. So please tell us a little bit about your experience.
Gracias, Marta. Yo creo que el mensaje lo empaquetaría, lo encapsularía
Well, I think that the
la
message
importancia de
is basically the
reconocer y
importance of
fortalecer
acknowledging and
existentes. Y en
strengthening
muchos
existing
casos,
agendas.
nos inventamos,
In
no
many
sé, algunos
cases,
títulos
we have come
rimbombantes
up with these
sobre cómo vamos
fancy
a fortalecer la
titles on how to
resiliencia climática de las
strengthen
ciudades,
climate
cómo
resilience of
vamos
cities, or how
a crear
we're
sinergias
going to
multinivel,
create
multiescalar, etcétera, entre
multi-level
diferentes
synergies
componentes
amongst
de las áreas
amongst
urbanas,
different
etcétera.
components of
Pero en
the urban
realidad,
agendas.
cuando empezamos
But the
a mirar
reality is that
un
when we
poco
start looking
del desglose
breaking
de los objetivos que queremos lograr
down
con diferentes
the
proyectos,
goals we want to
en
reach
su
with
gran
different
mayoría se
projects,
tratan de
well,
fortalecer
most
agendas
of
que ya
them
existen.
are
Y menciono
strengthening agendas that
particularmente
are already
para el caso, por ejemplo,
existing.
del proyecto de
And I'd like
National
to
Río Uruguay,
speak about the
donde
Uruguay
hay un
River
componente
specifically, where
fundamental
there's a
que
key
es ordenamiento
component
territorial.
that's
Y buena parte
land
de los
ordering.
proyectos
And
que
part
hemos
of the
abordado
projects
desde
that
la
we have
perspectiva de agenda
approached
climática,
from the
de
climate
biodiversidad y de
perspective
manera de gestión de
on
riesgo de desastres,
biodiversity
apuntan al
and the
fortalecimiento de
risk
esta
of
agenda,
cities,
apuntan
it's
al
to
fortalecimiento de la
strengthen that
ley de
agenda,
ordenamiento
to
territorial,
strengthen
donde
land
se destaca
ordering,
la
where
caracterización de áreas en condición de amenaza, áreas
we
en condición de riesgo, áreas de importancia para la
locate
biodiversidad,
risk
ya sea
areas,
local, regional,
regional areas,
o
local
digamos
areas that
también
might be at
conocemos la
risk, where we
identificación de
also
asentamientos urbanos en condiciones de
identify
riesgo, etcétera. Entonces, digamos, hay un componente
risky
muy
urban
importante de ordenamiento
settlements. So there are
territorial
very components
que tiene
for
la
land
oportunidad de ser
ordering that have
fortalecido.
the
Y muchas
opportunity
veces ese
of
ordenamiento
being
territorial no
strengthened.
solamente pasa por
And
el contexto
that
de un municipio,
land
sino
ordering
también por
is
el
not just
contexto de un
something that goes
territorio
through the
como una cuenca, en
municipality,
este
but
caso como
also
una
the
cuenca
context
binacional.
as a basin, and in this
Entonces,
case, a
un
specific
elemento clave
binational
es
basin.
poder
So a key
identificar estos
component is
espacios
being
donde
able to
existe una
identify those
mayor
spaces
oportunidad
where
de
there
obtener
are
mejores
more
resultados.
opportunities of
Como
achieving the
gestores del
results
proyecto, en conjunto con los beneficiarios, estamos apuntando.
that we
Y
want
donde
to obtain
efectivamente,
as
por el
project
proceso de
managers. And because of the
fortalecimiento,
strengthening
no solamente
process and
desde la
because of
perspectiva normativa, pero también de
the
trabajar con los actores que intervienen en esa agenda,
regulation perspective and the
hay mayores
stakeholders
posibilidades de
of this
éxito.
agenda,
Por
there are
lo tanto,
more
lo menciono,
possibilities of
ordenamiento
success.
territorial
And I'm
es
speaking of
clave,
land
ha
ordering,
sido
that is
fundamental
key. It's
para
been
el proyecto
key
binacional, pero en
for
general
this
para todos
binational
los
project,
proyectos que tenemos en la
but
adaptación.
for all projects that we
Y
have
el
for
otro componente
adaptation.
también ha
And the other
sido,
component
y muy en línea
that's also aligned
con uno de los temas centrales de este webinar, es la agenda de
to one
biodiversidad.
of the main topics of this webinar
En
is
muchos
the
casos pasa por el
biodiversity
trabajo
agenda.
con los sistemas nacionales de áreas
We sometimes
protegidas,
have to work with the national protected
desde
areas,
una perspectiva macro, en un
and
momento
well,
que
from the
estos
macro
sistemas de áreas
perspective,
protegidas pasan
we
por
have
una
this
escala mucho menor, pero digamos
projects, but
en su esencia,
the essence of this is
lo que
that
hemos apuntado es a devolverle el
we
reconocimiento que
want
tienen
to bring
sistemas de áreas
back
protegidas, ecosistemas
the
estratégicos
recognition to these
en
natural protected
diferentes
areas,
agendas del desarrollo.
and to do
Por
this in
supuesto,
the
en la agenda
different
de
areas
adaptación al
of
cambio
development
climático
and
y de
climate
que
adaptation
cumplen estos ecosistemas
that
ribereños del
also
río Uruguay en reducir el impacto de las
help
inundaciones.
reduce the impact
Pero
of
también en
floodings,
múltiples
but
otros contextos
in many other contexts as well,
para el aporte que tienen en
for the
reducir el
contribution
riesgo
that they have in reducing
de
the risk of
costera, como estamos
slides,
hablando,
of
por
coastal
ejemplo, corredores, los ecosistemas de
erosion,
manglar,
such as the
y el
mangrove
cómo estos
ecosystems,
actores,
and
y
how
entonces viene
those
otra vez
actors,
referido al mensaje,
and again, we
que
have
ya venían trabajando en la conservación y
these
uso
actors that
sostenible
were already working in the
tienen una
sustainability of
oportunidad
biodiversity,
para
and they have an
fortalecer lo que ya
opportunity
van haciendo
for strengthening what
desde
they're
la
already
perspectiva de la
doing
posibilidad de
from the
lograr
perspective and the
objetivos de adaptación
possibility of
climática,
reaching
objetivos de reducción de
objectives
riesgo
of
de desastres.
climate
Entonces, al final vienen siendo dos ejemplos
risk.
de,
And so these are
del
two
mensaje central de esta
examples of the
pregunta,
main
y es que uno de los
the main
que,
message of this
que con el
question,
tiempo
and one
hemos
of the big
aprendido a
approaches that we've
maximizar
learned
y
through
del cual
time to
también tenemos
maximize,
lecciones aprendidas,
and we also have
es
learned
el cómo
lessons, and that is
fortalecer agendas
how to strengthen existing agendas, how not to try to have a new institutionality through a new project or try to replace the institutionality that already exists, but the other way around, to have more success possibilities if we work with processes that are already working and processes that might benefit from which not just of financing, but also for including new success measures such as the adaptation agenda and the risk management agenda. Thanks so much for having these cross-cutting objectives to find these different points that respond to an objective, something that Ricardo also spoke about in his answer, and that's part of the strategy for adding those partners to the project that enable its participation. And Isabel, a little bit of the experience that you shared about Guayaquil. You said that we have these regulations and that we have to have different stakeholders participating, but we also have to recover different results of previous cases where people have a right response of a solution. And how have we coordinated from the municipality so that those proposals can become urban projects that include biodiversity elements?
Uno de los proyectos que hoy por
One of
hoy
the projects
para mí es uno de los más vigentes
is one of
y
the most
realmente
valid
es
ones, and that's
una inversión sencilla, un
a
proyecto
very easy
relativamente
investment.
sencillo. Es la implementación de cámaras trampa para poder seguir monitoreando la
It's to keep
biodiversidad
monitoring
que se encuentra
biodiversity
dentro de nuestros
that's
fondos. Como mencioné en mi
inside our
intervención
area.
anterior,
As
nosotros
I previously
contamos con
mentioned,
diferentes
we
especies,
had different species,
especies ecosistemas
different
que son
ecosystems
frágiles de
that
acuerdo a nuestra
are
misma constitución, de
fragile
regreso
based on our
parte de la
own constitution.
normativa.
I'm coming
Y
back
desde
to
nuestra misma
the
constitución,
regulation,
siendo
and from our
Ecuador
constitution, I think that
en
Ecuador,
derecho ambiental está
when it comes
muy
to
avanzado.
environmental law,
Y
is
dicho
very
esto,
advanced. And
el
having said
manglar,
this,
bosques secos,
the
los humedales,
mangrove, dry
legalmente tienen una categoría de
forest,
protección
wetlands have
bastante elevada.
a
Sin
protection
embargo, la
category that's quite
presión,
high. However,
a
the
lo largo de todo este
pressure,
webinar se ha estado
like
hablando
we've
de que
discussed in all this
la
panel,
expansión
is
de
that
la
the
zona urbana, los
expansion of
asentamientos
urban
irregulares
area,
ejercen una presión en
irregular
nuestros
urban
ecosistemas.
settlings,
Sin
put
duda
pressure in
alguna,
these ecosystems,
vamos
and
perdiendo y vamos
we are
fraccionando estos
losing
ecosistemas.
and we're
Entonces,
fractioning these
en ese
ecosystems.
sentido,
So,
me pareció a mí, me parece
to
muy
me,
vigente
it's very
uno de
valid
nuestros
now
ganadores
that one
que
of our winners,
implementó cámaras trampa
for
en
instance,
uno de
is that
nuestros
they
ecosistemas de bosque seco,
implemented
uno de los que estamos
trap
perdiendo
cameras
más
and
aquí
in
en
this
Guayaquil. Y
dry
pudimos
forest,
ver
and we're losing a big part of that. And we were able to
como es el
see
caso del tigrillo,
fauna
como
such as
es el caso de otros mamíferos, efectivamente,
tigers,
también
different
monos,
mammals,
que tenemos en la zona urbana, en la mitad de la ciudad.
all over the
Y antes
city.
obviamente era como un mito, pero a partir de la
And it
implementación
was
de
a
estas
myth,
cámaras
but after
trampa, lo que se
implementing these
decía y
trap
lo que se
chambers and
contaba,
these trap
ya pudo
cameras,
llegar finalmente
what we all
a la
heard
ciudadanía de
now
pie, que puede
was seen
observar
by everyone in the
que no
city, that
visita
they
y dice,
can
bueno,
see
resulta ser que
areas
sí
that,
había
well, it
monos,
seems that,
resulta ser
yeah,
que sí habían papagayos,
it's true, there are
que
monkeys
sí
here.
habían estas diferentes
There
especies de
are all
mamíferos.
these
Y
different
producto de
species
eso
of
también se
mammals.
genera como una curiosidad.
And
Hoy en día tanto se habla de la ciencia
people
ciudadana.
are curious now,
Entonces,
and
es
we
el hecho
speak
de que, bueno, no
about
solamente en este ecosistema,
citizen
pero también
science,
los que
and not
están
just in this
cercanos.
ecosystem, but the
Por
ones that are
ejemplo, es el
close as
caso
well,
de este
such
bosque seco,
as
que
this
es un bosque
dry
protector,
forest,
que es el
that's
bosque protector Cerro Blanco,
Cerro
aquí en
Blanco
Guayaquil.
forest here in
Está
Guayaquil.
rodeado de
And it
diferentes
is
urbanizaciones
surrounded
o
by
zonas
different
residenciales. Entonces,
organizations,
producto de
residential
esto, las
areas,
personas que viven
and a product
cerca
of the people that
ya
live
pueden
around it
comenzar a apreciar de otra
can
forma aquello
start
que les rodea.
analyzing what's around
Terminan siendo
them.
como también los
And they
principales
end up
defensores
being
de este tipo de espacios.
the
Entonces,
main people that defend
en
all
ese
this.
sentido,
So
para mí, sin duda
to
alguna,
me,
no solamente es un ejemplo de decir, bueno,
this is not just an example
el
of saying
ganador implemente más
the
cámaras trampa.
winner
No,
has to
es el hecho
implement
de que
more
Guayaquil,
trap
y esto
cameras.
lo
No,
tengo
it's
la
a
dicha,
fact that
nosotros vamos a
Guayaquil, and
llegar
this is
como
the stage
municipio,
where we will
vamos a
be
comenzar
here
a
as a
monitorear
municipality, we
nuestra
will start
biodiversidad. Y
monitoring our
próximamente, obviamente, el ganador
biodiversity. So
va
it's
a
not
establecer
just
el tema de las
the
cámaras
winner that
trampas, que
will have
Guayaquil
this
también entra
trap
en
cameras, but also
2025 en el que
Guayaquil will
quiere
be in
trabajar
2025 where
en
they
su
want to
plan
work
cantonal de biodiversidad
in
y poder
their
comenzar a
biodiversity
monitorear qué
plan
es lo que está sucediendo
and to see
en
what's
diferentes
happening
zonas
in
que
different
son
areas.
de ecosistemas frágiles
that are fragile ecosystems, and that they might not be cataloged as natural protected areas, or that they might have a category of conservation. So these are patches of natural resources that are now fragmented and that we have to reestablish their connectivity. And that's where we're heading, that's where we want to work, but it's quite important to connect this, to understand better that sometimes we have to bring this to a different level. We know what the 2030 goals are to increase the number of natural protected areas. For us as a municipality, this norm allows us to work independently from the central government and to create municipal areas of conservation. So that's where we can start protecting spaces where the citizens themselves want to protect. So beyond the conservation of ecosystems, it's also important to work having a plan of biodiversity, because that would allow us to work in stronger campaigns in explaining situations that are happening. This week has been a very strong week for us. We have forest fires, and they spoke about the sixth massive extinction from our colleague from Mexico City. He spoke about the sixth massive extinction, and every single year we break a record in the highest temperatures, and every single year we're citizens that did not have these fires are devastated as the fires we're having. Unfortunately, we're playing against the clock. We're going counter or clockwise with all these threats and the consequences that we see because of the very high temperatures. Guayaquil, for instance, has a heat island effect that's not just in some areas of the city, but all over the city. And I'm speaking about this, working in this ecosystem, but also working in having and knowing what are it wouldn't work if we do not counteract these heat islands through improving our green mesh, for instance. That's what we're doing in Guayaquil. It was very hard to keep this biodiversity. Ecuador is one of the most mega diverse countries, and we have part of that biodiversity here in Guayaquil. And we have to understand that this is something that's important to all of us.
Al gobierno provincial o en su defecto al municipio. Nos compete a todos como ciudadanos de poner nuestro granito de arena para poder cuidar de este espacio, y por eso es que el municipio, entendiendo esta lógica, lo que quiere es trabajar de la mano con la ciudadanía y que sea un trabajo participativo. Muchas gracias.
Isabel, a ti muchísimas gracias.
Thanks so much, Isabel. And you spoke about something very interesting, and Ricardo spoke about this as well. And this is the capability of connecting the community through what we are monitoring. And what we discussed in the previous panel, the importance of monitoring. It's important to show what people have and how they can use it. So we want to thank the three of you. We have spoken about these global problems, climate change, the loss of biodiversity, but what you have discussed today is how these local solutions, including the challenges, including the agendas, including the articulation with different sectors, can enable us to propose a solution that tries to solve part of those problems when it comes to the environment, biodiversity, and climate change. So we want to thank you. I want to thank you for your participation in this panel. It was great listening to you. And Maria, I'll pass the floor to you. And again, thanks so much for being in this panel. Well, thanks so much, Martha, for moderating this space, and to our speakers for their contributions. You have enriched this space with key information for urban managers, for government, for municipalities about project incubation, projects that are innovative and strategies that fulfill the principles of biodiversity, but that they also comply with the development agenda. So this information and everything we've discussed today
muestran cuáles son grandes beneficios que
shows
tenemos
the big
de
elements
biodiversidades al formar
of
parte de ellos.
biodiversities being part of it.
Agradecemos mucho
I
también
would
a
like to thank so
nuestros,
much
asistentes a este webinar de
all
forma virtual
participants
por el
to these
tiempo
webinars. Thanks so much
hemos
for your
estado en el
time.
espacio. Voy a ir cerrando el evento y le vamos a dar paso para ello nuevamente al coordinador de la red de
And
biodiversidades,
again,
Alejo Ramírez,
Alejo
para que nos des
Ramirez,
tus
we pass the
reflexiones de
floor to
cierre
you so
y
that you
también
help
pues
us
nos
reflect
cuentes
on the
cómo
closing
ven los
remarks and
próximos
that you
pasos
tell
de
us a
este
little bit
webinar.
about the
Alejo,
following
por favor,
steps
se va
and the
contigo.
network. Alejo, the
Gracias,
floor
María
is
Elena.
yours.
Solo chequear si
Thanks
me
so
escuchas
much,
bien.
Maria Elena, just to see if you can hear me well.
Excelente, bueno.
Yes.
Muchísimas gracias
Thanks so much.
por darme la palabra. Ha
Thanks so
sido
much
realmente
for
un gustazo
this
escuchar
event. It's been
tanta
great
diversidad
listening
de
to
puntos de
all
vista,
these diversity, all these
tantos
different points of
consensos
view, all
y
these
al mismo
different
tiempo tantas
agreements, but
diversidades de
also all
periodistas
these
y
diversities of points of
académicos
view,
muy reconocidos a nivel
specialists,
regional,
academia,
como
well-known
disfruté
people.
muchísimo, Isabel,
And I
escucharte
really liked,
y
Isabel,
poder saber
listening to you and to know that
Guayaquil va a
soon
ser parte de la red de
Guayaquil will
biodiversidad,
be part of the
tantas
biodiversity
tantos
strategic
proyectos en
city
conjunto y con tantas cosas.
with all these many
Acá también
projects that we
va
have.
a ser un inmenso placer, pero también
It would be a great
a Ricardo
pleasure,
Vives,
but
un
also
estratega de
Ricardo,
en aceleración de
expert
proyectos, pero con un vínculo
in
con
project
gente
acceleration.
digo, tanto consenso y tantos puntos de vista distintos. O sea, efectivamente
All
estamos
this agreement,
creo que
all these
ese es el
different
principal mensaje que nos llevamos,
viewpoints. That's a key message that we're taking.
de las
And
ideas a la
that
acción,
this leap of
un impacto
ideas
que
into
tiene
action is a leap
en este equipo,
that
todo el
we
equipo
have in this
ONU-Habitat,
team
una
with
alianza
you
que
and
viene
Habitat.
muy
So
estratégica
this is a very
para
strategic
quería también
partnership
agradecer
that we're doing. I'd like to
a Marta
thank
Castillo y a
specifically
Oscar
Martha
Guevara
Castillo
de la Gerencia de Acción Climática
and
y Biodiversidad Positiva dentro de CAF. Como ustedes saben, somos
Positive
10 responsabilidades.
Biodiversity
Hay una parte de
and
biodiversidad y una parte de ciudades. La Gerencia de Acción Climática es la que más sabe dentro del banco de los temas de biodiversidad y nosotros desde la Gerencia de Desarrollo Urbano, Agua y
and from
Economía
the
Circular
urban
trabajamos con las
development,
ciudades.
we're working with
Este
the connection with
hermanamiento
cities,
de las palabras
and
es también un hermanamiento de gerencias dentro del banco. Así
we're
que
also
muchísimas
working in the bank on
Marta
these. And
y
thanks so much,
Ricardo.
Martha and Carlos.
También quería agradecer
And I'd
al
also
resto de
like to thank
expositores, de académicos, de
all
políticos que han
speakers,
participado
academia,
del webinar. Creo que nos llevamos una
that
semana
are
muy
part of the
enriquecedora.
webinar. We're
También el
taking
hecho de que
great
pueda estar permanentemente
experiences and
en,
having
en las redes, que lo podamos volver a ver es un elemento
and
muy
having
importante
this
para
on the social media so that we can watch it again. It's great for strengthening the capabilities of territories and the experiences both of Ricardo and Isabel that have brought to the table very interesting ideas. So I would also like to thank Amparo Arteaga from CAF that work so that this would work, and technical teams of Humboldt, at ONU-Habitat, for providing us and sharing these very interesting experiences. And we will keep elaborating on this, and we will soon launch the invitation for mobilization, for acceleration, and mentorship of projects. And one last component that I want to add is this logic of local solutions. And we see the territories and cities can do great things, and they're not small things, they're big things. So we want to be in partnership with cities, we want to be in partnership with institutions that are working on that line. I'm from CAF. We want to thank everyone who's participating, specifically on those peaks of lots of people connected, and then it's difficult to keep this rating level. Just imagine a webinar speaking about those challenges, but I think we've achieved one of the highest peaks in these experiences. So thank again to our ONU-Habitat colleagues again, and Humboldt colleagues for the work and effort. And thanks so much. See you next time, and see you on YouTube. Thanks so much to everyone.
Gracias, Alejo. Pues,
thanks so much, Alejo.
Gracias a todos nuestros moderadores, ponentes, participantes y al público.
Thanks our moderators, speakers. Thanks everyone that followed this broadcast on YouTube, and thanks so much for following us on our different social media. We're reaching the end of our third and last session of this webinar series, Transforming Cities from the Biodiversity Network, where we've had experiences with different experts on cities that allow us to know cities as an opportunity for creating urban models that are resilient
desafíos ambientales actuales
facing
y
current
los impactos de
challenges
la triple
and
crisis planetaria que se ha
the
abordado
triple
en
planetary
esta
crisis that we've covered in this webinar. So this session and the previous sessions of these webinars are available on the official YouTube website of UN-Habitat, as well as in UN-Habitat, and all information shared by our different guests throughout the webinars available in the description of the video. And we're closing today's session. CAF and UN-Habitat want to thank you for your participation and for being here. See you next time.